That'd be the best. Get my volume down anyway.
Okay, members of the board, members of the team here at the service, and members of the public, we're calling this meeting to order for Thursday, August 25th, 2022, and I just realized today's my anniversary. Oh dear. Okay, I hadn't spoken the date until just now. Okay. Now I'm stressed out. Members, Mr. Secretary, do we have any regrets today?
Not today, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And we do note that we are attempting to connect with Board Member Somerville, who is joining us electronically, and he should be with us shortly. Members of the board, are there any disclosures of conflict of interest to declare today? Not seeing any, so we'll move on. I want to draw your attention to the minutes from the meeting held on Thursday, June 30th. We did not have a July meeting. Does anybody wish to give me a motion to approve those minutes? Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Ingrid. Any comments, questions, errors, or omissions? Not seeing any. All in favor of the approval of the minutes as circulated? And those are carried. Thank you. We'll jump right into it. Well, first of all, I do want to say welcome to Ron LeClaire, who's joining us live today. He's our zone advisor, so welcome to the meeting today. I hope that we live up to the standards of our Zoom meetings, or better. Welcome. We have two presentations today, and I'm going to change the order of the presentation. We're going to do the mental health strategy presentation first. So I call to the podium Inspector Julie Craddock and Rick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a brief introduction. As you know, we've presented to the board in a number of different ways just how mental health crisis has impacted our organization. We're happy to have Inspector Julie Craddock and Rick Judson here from our Regional Community Mobilization Bureau to provide an overview of our strategy to not only the response to mental health, but the proactive pieces and the partnerships that we've created in the community to ensure that our programming and our response is informed and appropriate to today's needs. So we understand that there will likely be some conversation that ensues after that. Part of the importance of the board's presentation today is not only understanding our strategy, but the future state, some of the risks associated to sustainability of funding for the mental health model in the province, and so we look forward to those conversations. So with that, I'll turn over to Inspector Julie Craddock. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Happy anniversary.
Thank you. Maybe that'll get me out of trouble. Julie said it, so
yeah, that's right. Put it on camera. I just want to say thank you for having us here today, to the chair of the board, chiefs and deputies, and really giving us some space. I know you have a really busy agenda, just giving us some space on that to talk about our mental health service delivery. We do have a formal PowerPoint presentation for you that we're going to go through, but before we go there, I just wanted to share with you just a bit of a personal story. One that's very long and complex, and I do tend to be a bit of a storyteller, so I promise I will keep this short. But in 2016, my husband's a police officer. He was involved in a fairly massive critical incident. And that led to him going into a very dark place. By 2017, he was having a lot of suicidal ideation. And towards the end of 2017, he almost had a suicide attempt with his own service-issued firearm. The work that we do in policing, we talk about mental health a lot. He recognized right away that he was a person in crisis. And he reached out for help. And that's something that had this happened, 10 or 15 years ago, he may not have been comfortable doing that. The wheels of the mental health response within policing really started to take root. And he was immediately put into an inpatient treatment facility where he was stabilized, he was put on medication, and he really got a ton of support there. He came out with a complex PTSD diagnosis, which actually helped with his recovery. So a really traumatic incident that I'm very happy to say in 2022, a lot of the people in this room have met him. He is, the life of the party. He's in a really good place mentally. And, just a really engaged father and a husband and completely off medication today. And he has this remarkable story, and we talk about it a lot with, the people within this organization, within his own organization, because he is a success story. But he's just one of many success stories in this community. And, I'm not going to go through it, but I actually have, this folder here of letters and emails from citizens that talk about the positive impact that our members and our teams have had on them. And, many of them write to tell me that they have, been connected to services, they've been supported, and that work that we're doing has not only helped them achieve that same successful outcome, but many of them write in these letters that it's changed their lives, and that's pretty remarkable. So we are going to get into the presentation that Sergeant Justin's going to do, but I just want to leave you with this. So I have a 22-year-old son who's also a police officer. Yesterday, my 21-year-old daughter signed an offer of employment, so she will be starting her journey as a police officer next week. And, as I have a very new respect for my mother, who has told me that she hasn't slept in the last 30 years. But, as a senior police officer in this organization, the mother of police officers, there's a ton of things that keep us awake at night. But mental health is really one of the things that's at the top of that list. And that's because the incidents that our members are responding to are high frequency, and we're going to go through some of the stats, and but they're also extremely high risk, not just for the person in crisis, but also for their families, for the community at large, and for the first responders that are working with them. And so we hope today to leave you, just as police boards and as a police organization and as senior leaders, that we really need to continue to invest in and prioritize mental health, because we want those positive outcomes to be for everybody. So with that, I'm going to say, Miigwech, thank you very much. I am going to turn it over to Sergeant Justin, and as the deputy said, we will be available afterwards for any questions that you may have, and I will leave it with Rick.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having us here today. I always forget there's people on camera. I don't know where to look when I hear those voices. Hello. So as Inspector Paddock said, my name is Rick Judson. I'm the sergeant in our Regional Community Mobilization Bureau. I work here out of headquarters. One of the things that I'm responsible for is our mental health service delivery and the programs that we run in regards to mental health service delivery. And that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today, are those programs, some of the statistics and some of the challenges and things that we have going on. Mental illness is one of those things that everybody in here probably knows somebody who has some sort of mental illness, mental health concern. According to the Canadian Mental Health Association, 1 in 5 Canadians have some sort of mental illness, whether it's dementia, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, borderline personality, whatever it may be. Approximately 1 in 5. And those are just estimates. My estimation, personally, would be that it would be a little bit higher. Some of the things that our officers are dealing with out on the road are things like personality, borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia, and so on. These are our statistics since 2011. These statistics you'll see year over year, our mental health priority calls are going up. If you look at it, it goes up approximately 200 calls a year. Those are just the occurrences that we head as a mental health priority call. Those don't involve the intimate partner violence calls that have an element of mental illness. Those don't include the just general check on well-being calls. This is just the mental health priority calls. Year over year, they go up. And if you notice that one column there about apprehensions, if you notice in 2011, our officers apprehended over 50% of the time. And I'll go into why that's changing over the years. Up until 2021, we're apprehending approximately 40% of the time, which I think is good, and I'll get into why. That final column about completed suicides, there's a little asterisk beside that, is because these are just suicides that we believe as the police were actual suicides. We can't classify them all until the coroner does that. But you'll notice there that those numbers are pretty consistent. Even though our calls for service are going up, those completed suicides are kind of remaining the same, and the percentage overall is going down. And I can explain that a little bit later as well. With COVID, everybody thinks that the numbers went up, that mental health became a crisis. You'll actually see in 2020 that the numbers compared to 2019 went down. And then they went up again in 2021. Part of the reason for for those numbers potentially going down the first year of the pandemic was people were isolated in their homes, friends and family weren't being seen, their coworkers weren't seeing them, and we get a lot of calls from family and coworkers about things like this. So people were isolated, they weren't necessarily able to get the help that they want. Another thing that I'm going to say about statistics is that although these numbers are going up, one thing that I'll say to kind of put this into perspective is that the community has done a lot of work for years to try and destigmatize mental illness, trying to make it so people feel comfortable to reach out for help. So that's what I try and focus on now, is that yes, these numbers are going up and it can cause people to kind of think, oh no, it's a crisis. It could be, but we're making it so people feel more comfortable to reach out for help. And to me, that should be the goal. There's been a big progression in mental health service delivery over the years. For us personally, what we've been doing here, all new police officers get some mental illness training at the Ontario Police College. But then here at Halton Police, we improve that. We build on that. So for all the new employees that come, the new officers, we provide them with mental health training through each of the different levels of training that they get. We try and start small and build up, give them the experience on the road, and then provide them with even more training. Other training opportunities that we have is called the Crisis Intervention Training. It's an internationally recognized training course. It's 40 hours. And this is where we work with external partners to give officers training, enhanced training in mental health, de-escalation, empathy-based training, things like that. We've committed to train all of our frontline members in crisis intervention training. That's front desk staff, that's communicators, records, anybody who works in this police department, police service, will be getting this training over the next few years. And again, this is not training that we as the police are training our police officers on. This is training that we're collaborating with external partners, the Canadian Mental Health Association, the Reach Out Centre for Kids, Developmental Services Ontario. We're having them come in to tell us what they think that we need to know. And I think it's great. So over time, it'll be so every member here has that training. With our mental health teams that I'll go into in a little bit, we're enhancing their training as well. What I found out since I've been in this role, I've been in this role 4 years now, is that there's not a lot of police-specific training out there for mental illness. There's not very much out there. I've made phone calls, I've done a lot of research, and there's not a lot out there. So because of our partnerships that I'll go into later, some of our mental health partners like CMHA and St. Joe's Hospital, some of their members go through additional training through the Crisis Trauma and Resource Institute. So some of our officers are getting additional training on anxiety, bipolar disorder, things like that. Again, just to give them more education and tools for when they're out there in the community. And another thing that's enhanced our service delivery is collaboration. Collaboration is the key. We as the police, we get called to all sorts of different things, and we're not necessarily always the experts. So if we can work with those experts and bring them to those calls with us, that's just going to create a better service delivery model for everybody. Our mobile crisis rapid response teams that I'll be speaking about, they have additional training. They have that collaboration with mental health professionals. And just so you know as well, that any of our specialty mental health teams, that officer has to be first class. Give them a few years experience on the road to develop their skills, and then they can move into working with our mental health partners. Another thing that's developed is our pathways to help people out, because we as the police aren't necessarily always the best person. So we have MOUs, Memorandums of Understanding, with the Canadian Mental Health Association, Reach Out Centre for Kids, and we're working on one right now with ADAPT for alcohol and addiction as well. Previously, for many years, we as the police would be called to mental illness calls, and we didn't have very much to rely on. We had our Section 17 apprehension authority under the Mental Health Act, which basically says if we believe somebody is being affected by mental illness and they're a danger to themselves or others, then we can apprehend them and then take them to the hospital for care. That was really our only tool at the time for years. As things have developed, with the development of additional training and our partnerships with community partners, we bring a more fulsome approach to calls now. And that's where that crisis intervention course that I was telling you about earlier kind of comes into play. And this is really where our mental health professional teams really bring a lot to the table. Now, when they're going on the scene, they have more education, they have more intervention skills, they have more de-escalation techniques, and a couple of these here, the diversion and referrals. Before in the past, we would go to a mental health occurrence. The officer would decide if they had to apprehend the person or not, and if they didn't apprehend them, we'd just move on. Nothing really happened with that call. So now, because of partnerships, mainly with the Canadian Mental Health Association, every one of our mental health occurrences goes to the Canadian Mental Health Association to review it, track it, and then offer supports later on. So it's a more fulsome approach. And then another one that I want to touch on is this advocate for a client at the hospital. With our mental health team specifically, I'm thinking about myself for my family members. If my family had to be, somebody from my family needed to be apprehended under the Mental Health Act and taken to the hospital, me personally, I'd much rather have a healthcare professional, like a mental health nurse, mental health social worker, be able to present that person to the emergency department staff to properly articulate why that person's there, why they need assistance. And that's not to discredit our officers in any way, but it just has that medical professional that is there to delegate for those people. I'm sure everybody in here has heard about one of our teams, the Crisis Outreach and Support Team, COAST, that's in partnership with the Canadian Mental Health Association Halton Region Branch. This, if everybody remembers your community safety and well-being model, this is under the risk intervention model and category. We've had this partnership since 2006. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you a brief little history about how this type of team came into play. 1987, Vancouver started their own mental health team, but locally here in Ontario. Hamilton started the very first COAST team in 1997. And unfortunately, that came out of this tragic incident with this little gentleman, Zachary Ansidormi. I don't want to get into a whole lot. There's a lot of details behind it. The summary of it, there was a lot of police calls between Zachary's family and their neighbor, the neighbor who had severe mental illness. And one day the neighbor stabbed Zachary to death while he was being pulled on a wagon outside. The inquest that was done following that showed that the police had a lot of information about this neighbor. Other social services had information about this neighbor, but nobody spoke to each other. So that's where the formation of a COAST team really came from in Hamilton. And then we adopted that model in 2006. In Hamilton, they partner with St. Joe's Healthcare. We here partner with Canadian Mental Health Association, Halton Region Branch. So here's our team. We have one team on every single day, 7 days a week. Their mandate is to divert people away from the hospital and divert them away from the criminal justice system. They provide care in the community. So like I mentioned earlier, every single one of our mental health occurrences get forwarded to the Canadian Mental Health Association, where they do a review of those occurrences, they cross-reference it with their database, and then in partnership with one of our officers, they determine who they should go out and provide services to. It's kind of a risk intervention model. They'll analyze it, and they'll go out into the community, which is the key to this team. They'll go into the community where that person can feel comfortable, whether it's at their home, at a Tim Hortons, in a park, wherever it may be. We want that person to feel comfortable, because if they're more comfortable, they're more likely to accept the services that are offered to them and carry on. The goal of this is to prevent these non-emergency calls from becoming an emergency down the road. Again, risk intervention. This team is made up of a crisis worker from the Canadian Mental Health Association and a police officer from the whole regional police. Again, they have to be first class, have additional training. They're in plain clothes. Again, we want to try and make it as non-police, because just the sight of our uniform sometimes can cause people to be traumatized or go into crisis. So they're plain clothes, again, to make people try and feel comfortable. And they drive an unmarked vehicle. This team does not respond to emergency calls. Their sole purpose is to provide support in the community. Again, I was saying it's a risk intervention model, trying to provide people with support in advance of it becoming an emergency. The only downfall, I would say, to this partnership with the Canadian Mental Health Association is that these services, they will only reach out to people 16 years of age or older. That's the CMHA's mandate for age. But I've been here before in the past talking about a partnership we now have with Reach Out Center for Kids, so we do referrals to them as well. But with COAST specifically, the person or family has to be 16 years of age or older, and this team works Monday to Sunday, 9 to 9. Everybody always wants to know about stats and numbers. Pre-pandemic, our crisis outreach and support team, they were attending probably between 400 and 450. I don't call them calls. They were making contact with 400 to 400 people. 400 to 450 people in the community every year. The pandemic obviously put a little bit of a damper on that because of staffing and so on. So they're between 250 to 450 visits a year. We're trying to get that back up, but again, we're still dealing with some struggles due to staffing and so on with partners. So that's our risk intervention model. Trying to get to people and offer supports before they go into crisis. But then we have another team I'm sure everybody here has heard about, and this is our crisis response team, our mobile crisis rapid response team, and this is done in partnership with St. Joe's Hospital out of Hamilton. Here's one of the teams right there. This is a new picture. I actually really enjoy this picture. Again, their mandate is to divert away from the hospital, divert away from the criminal justice system. I think everybody in here can agree that somebody with severe mental illness, if they've done something criminal, shouldn't necessarily be just relied upon the courts to try and help them. We need other partners involved. What I learned through my policing career is that, and this was an example for me, I'd get called to a mental health crisis. The person would be in crisis. It was quite obvious, and I can go into many reasons why. And then we would apprehend that person, take them to the hospital, and by the time we got to the hospital, that person was calm. And then the hospital staff would say, why are they here? They're not in crisis. And originally, me as a younger officer would sit there and go, but you weren't there. You didn't see what we said. And so now, what we've kind of done is we've brought that assessment, that medical/mental health assessment to the person while they're in crisis. And again, what I was talking about earlier about that presentation of the hospital, unfortunately, that the hospital will take what the mental health professional, nurse, social worker says into account a little bit more than what the officers say. And I get that. The professional type courtesy, they speak the same language. This team is made up of a crisis worker and a uniformed officer. We have 3 teams on right now. Since 2017, we've had 2 teams. We've had a team that's worked 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., an additional team that's worked 1 p.m. to 1 a.m. And that's all based on statistics, call volume at those times, and so on. Just this past April, we had an additional 3rd team put onto the road through funding through the Ministry of the Solicitor General. It's one-time funding to expand on current mental health teams. That team, based on the funding, they work Monday to Thursday one week, Tuesday to Friday the following week, 10-hour shifts. I would love for this team to continue on, and we do continue to look for different options to be able to support the funding and so on. I'll go into some numbers here in a few minutes, but these teams to me, are invaluable. What these teams bring to the table is on-site, in-crisis de-escalation skills. With that mental health worker, they can do an assessment on the scene at the time that person's in crisis, and they can do a risk assessment. One of the things that we've always had trouble with is that somebody that we've dealt with in the community that is suffering from mental illness, how they are presenting to us could just be how they are as a person. They could be living with mental illness for their entire life, and although we as the police or people interacting with them in the community think, oh, this person needs help. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're in crisis and that they're a danger to themselves. So when we bring that mental health worker with us to that scene, they can access hospital records, they can see what that person's baseline behavior is, how they are, what other appointments they have coming up. Because if we're dealing with somebody today, and our mental health professional sees that they have an appointment with their family doctor or their psychiatrist the following day, they can do a safety plan to get that person through this interaction now and through the next day to be able to get to that appointment. Again, preventing us from having to apprehend that person, take them to the hospital, tie up our officers, tie up hospital staff, and possibly putting that person with mental illness in even more stress and crisis by having to go to the hospital. And I think everybody realizes now with the healthcare system and kind of a flux and staffing issue, the more people that we can keep in the community, the better it is for everybody. This team works 7 days a week. Christmas, they're working. Not all the teams because of staffing and so on, but there is a mental health crisis team on call every single day. The bonus with this team is that it doesn't, I was mentioning earlier about Coast, they'll do reach out for 16 years and older. This team will respond to any person, any age in crisis at the time. The reason they are still in uniform is that these teams will still respond to other priority calls. If they're in the area of robbery in progress, intimate partner violence call, but they will attend those as well. That's why they're still in that uniform. But what you can see there, that picture says police crisis team. What we've implemented recently is a simple little different vest patch that says police crisis team. Again, we're trying to reduce the stigma a little bit. A lot of people in the community who have had mental illness interactions with the police, for one reason or another, they might not feel comfortable. And the goal of this is just to provide some sort of visual reinforcement that the team that they're dealing with has additional mental health training and so on. This actually paid off within the last month. I wasn't going to tell this story, but if anybody's heard me speak before, I just talk. A family sought a Form 2 for their son. A Form 2 is where they go before Justice of the Peace and say that my loved one needs a mental health assessment. Form's issued, please act on it, find the person, apprehend them, take them to the hospital. This was one of the cases. The officers met the family in a parking lot because their son had a history of being violent and not really liking police. They thought meeting in a parking lot would be better for everybody. The son gets out of the car, sees our team, and gets very volatile, verbally aggressive. And then at one point he stops and looks at one of our officers and sees the crisis team patch, and he says, "Oh, you're with the crisis team?" And the officer says, "Yeah, part of the mobile crisis rapid response team." And the gentleman said, "Okay, I'll come with you." That simple. Even if that just helps one person, perfect. It just helps reduce the risk to us, helps reduce the risk to the person, helps reduce risk to the public. These teams attend between 1,100 and 1,300 calls every single year. So these two teams have been in place since 2017. Those numbers fluctuate. At the beginning, they were attending approximately 30% of all the mental health calls in Halton. Over time, though, that number has decreased. I've done everything I can to look at statistics and things like that to figure out how we can get, at the time, our two teams to attend more calls, but because of travel time, hospital wait times, they can only do one call at a time. They're stuck between 1,100 and 1,300 calls a year. So as our mental health calls go up, they're still attending the same number of calls, which is why their percentage is going down. This also equates, though, to that 60% of their time is spent on mental illness calls. Again, those are just those calls that are headed as a mental health call. That doesn't include the intimate partner violence calls and so on. So 60% of their time is on mental illness priority calls. When you factor in when they are doing phone support for other officers on mental illness calls, when they're attending and they're called to an intimate partner violence occurrence because there's a mental illness component, 80% of their time is spent providing mental health support. That's what I like to focus on, is that they're providing support for mental illness in the community. It's not always about that crisis part, that's support. Another risk intervention model that we have, that some may know about, is our situation table. This was one of Halton's very first community safety and well-being initiatives. Again, the whole idea of working with the community to make things a little bit better. We can't work in silos. We need to collaborate. So weekly, we have 30-plus community members, Children's Aid Society, Regional Center for Kids Pain, Mental Health Association, school boards, meet on a weekly basis to discuss potential cases in the community that could benefit from assistance. The term in there that you'll see is acutely elevated risk. That's the technical term for what we look for. Basically, they discuss situations in the community that they believe if something isn't done or offered to this person or family or neighborhood, that it's going to become an emergency down the road. Again, it's trying to provide support prior to becoming an emergency. And the key to this initial stage of this situation table is that de-identified information. So I wouldn't go in there and say, I've dealt with Inspector Craddock several times over the last few weeks and so on. It's very de-identified. Female, between the ages of 30 and 39. We've had this many police occurrences involving these risk factors, homelessness, addictions, mental illness, whatever it may be. It's a very basic summary to outline the risk factors that person's going through. And if we don't do something or offer something to them, that it could result in an emergency situation. What has to happen at that point is that the entire table goes to a vote. If everybody thinks, okay, we need to step in and offer support, then collaboratively they'll come up with a game plan to try and offer that person support. We're between 70 and 100 situations presented at this table annually. And I don't have the numbers about how many police occurrences this is stymied or anything like that. Because really the way I kind of look at things is, even if one person ends up with the supports that they need to help prevent them from going into further crisis or risk factors, then that, to me, that should really be a shining success story. And again, it's multi-sector, everybody working together to try and provide that person support. The thing that I need to mention about all of these teams, whether it's COAST, Mobile Crisis Rapid Response, and the situation table, is if that person is not apprehendable for us as the police, there's been times where people or community members have said, this person needs help, that person needs help, you need to do something. If that person's not apprehendable, they have to voluntarily want that help. So what happens quite often during the situation table when whoever's identified to be the team to help or try and offer support, it does happen quite often where there's a door knock or a telephone conversation where it's somebody else. It's typically an external organization, not the police, making that contact, saying, you know what, this is who we are. We want to help you. These are some supports. And if that person doesn't want it, they don't have to take it. And I think that's where a lot of people in the community have troubles, where we see this person, we interact with that person, we know that they could use help. But if they don't want it, we cannot force it on them. And that makes some people feel uncomfortable. That makes me feel uncomfortable sometimes because I can see if this person doesn't get those supports, that it's going to result in something. But again, we have to be able to let people make their own decisions sometimes. Another great partnership that we have, and this is based on funding as well, external funding through the Halton Region Community Investment Fund, is a partnership with the Canadian Mental Health Association Halton Region branch again, where we have a complex service. People go between complex service navigator, complex systems navigator. Basically, this is an employee from the Canadian Mental Health Association who works with us here at our headquarters, who works on the most complex cases that we deal with. When I say complex cases, I could give you so many examples right now of some of the complexity of those cases, and it would make some of you feel a little bit uncomfortable. The real benefit of this role is, because we do have social workers that work for the Halton Regional Police that provide support and so on, but because of workload and things like that, they can only spend so much time because they're so spread out. This complex service navigator, what she's able to do is she's able to take as much time as she needs to work on a particular case. She's not restricted by having to take on all these other calls or work on these other things. The sole goal for this role is to provide support for those most complex cases. I can't tell you enough how beneficial this role has been. We're hoping that this role continues. Again, a lot of these things are based on partnerships and funding. I wish money wasn't an issue, because then we could just roll these teams out as many as we want. We could do all these partnerships, but so much depends on funding and funding opportunities and things like that. The funding for this role ends March 2023, and we're really hoping that between the Canadian Mental Health Association and ourselves that we can figure out another way to to continue on with a role like this. That's what a lot of our mental health service delivery depends on, is that collaboration working with external partners. We need that. And again, a lot of it just ends up coming down to funding. I could talk about this for hours. This is one of those things, mental illness, service deliveries, it's actually become one of the passions for me in my policing career. When I started out, I was a road officer. I went into investigations, and when I got promoted, I'll be honest, the chief called me and said, Rick, congratulations, you're promoted. You're going to be working at the Regional Community Mobilization Bureau out of headquarters, and these are the things you're going to be responsible for. And I'll be honest, I got off the phone and went, oh. I thought of myself as an investigator, one of those types of police officers. But now that I've been in this role for 4 years, it's a role that I enjoy, and I actually have a passion for it. Because people need support instead of enforcement sometimes. This is a role that I actually feel like we are making a big change in the community. So keep me in this role.
We'll try and share the very small podium in the event that anybody has any questions or wants a further explanation of anything.
Board? I'm sorry, Creighton, your hand over there. Go ahead.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank you very much for this great presentation. I think it's been very informative, and I think the service is to be, congratulated on the extent to which this model has been developed, because truly, I think that's where success lies. To what extent, I mean, you have far more knowledge in this area than I do, to what extent is this model being pursued or developed on a wider basis? Do you have knowledge of that or information on that? Because
knowledge.
And you're willing to share it, I can see that.
Almost every single police service in the province right now has some form of crisis team, whether it's a crisis intervention support team, mobile crisis rapid response team. There's a big push for these services.
But some form, I mean,
so
you use the word some form.
Yep.
I mean, to what extent are they being developed out?
They're being developed
situation tables to, the full-blown approach.
Ontario is the leader when it comes definitely to this mental health service delivery model, but certainly, as Rick said, there's an awareness, I would say, with every organization across the country that we need to prioritize and focus on mental health, but the reality is that there's still tons of agencies that are so far behind what we're doing. We have this really holistic approach of internal training, and we went through every single policy to look at the language we were using when it comes to addiction disorders and when it comes to mental health, to make sure that we were reducing stigma even within our own policies. And there's a lot of things that we've done that just isn't being done, at a national level. And certainly I can speak from just my own experience with having kids in different organizations that, this is the gold standard of mental health service delivery. And, I think the reason why we're so passionate about it is because we are very aware that it is reliant on sometimes outside funding, community partnerships that we don't always necessarily have control over. But this is something that is making a really positive impact in this community, and where it's adopted in other communities, there as well.
Part of it, is there's a lot of different services out there in different municipalities that have different models,
right?
But it's to address their local need.
Right.
Toronto Police has a different model compared to us, and so on. It's really got to be focused on the local needs, and that's where it's a little bit different everywhere.
I guess this question maybe is for chief or deputies. How much discussion is there on this issue, for example, at the Ontario Association of Chiefs or the CAC, Canadian Association of Chiefs? Is this topical at those levels?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely topical. Raj could comment now, being on the board of the OACP, but it's something that's sort of front of mind for all police leaders, or if it's not, it should be. But as Julie and Rick are saying,
the real issue is it getting that? Because I think the success of a program when it's blown out like this, you know, is so impactful.
I mean, I sit on the CACP Policing with Indigenous Peoples Committee, and this is something that we talk a lot about because the crisis that First Nation communities are seeing when it comes to mental health, their officers don't have crisis teams, they don't have a COAS team, they don't have infrastructure within the community, and so it's very at the top of the agenda when we talk about it within certain, you know, policing across the country isn't equitable. Not every citizen across the country is receiving the same standard that, you know, citizens in Halton are receiving, and so it is something, certainly within my experience on the committee that I sit in, we do talk about this.
But I would say all services are not equal when it comes to this, and what you see here in a fabulous presentation is really a matrix approach to this, where there's several different layers and teams coming in at different times. There are mobile crisis rapid response teams in other jurisdictions who don't go to the person in crisis until uniform officers say it's okay. And we won't talk about specifics at some other point, but Raj certainly has the OACP updates maybe.
And that is the question, the elephant in the room is, why is this a policing issue? And it's because we've tried to be all things to everyone for so many years, and it's now catching up to us. And because we are the only 24/7 phone number you can call, we've become the de facto responders to mental health. So from an OACP lens, we have prioritized this for our advocacy. We're meeting with the Solicitor General soon to discuss these priorities. The issue becomes that just because we've been creative doesn't mean it's an equitable model at a provincial level. And we need to help services that maybe aren't as far down that road as us to ensure that they have the understanding and capabilities for funding, sustainable funding for these partnerships. Because one of our concerns is, although we have the desire to do this, does the CMHA have the bandwidth to provide that mental health practitioner to work with us? Because, you know, it's not about a funding piece for us per se, it's about what is the Ministry of Health doing in that space to provide support. So our advocacy role at a provincial level is to ensure that this is well known that this is a crisis. The shadow wave of the pandemic, believe me, is going to be more mental health crisis at all levels. And if we don't get upstream, then we're going to be in a position where we're continuing to talk about the need, but we're not fulfilling the needs of our community. So it is a priority. We are working both at a provincial and national level, and we look forward to our further conversations with our new Solicitor General on funding.
Just one other comment, if I may, Mr. Chair. You mentioned MOU with, I can't remember who it was exactly. I can't remember the acronym.
Canadian Mental Health Association.
So who was proactive in that? Did you chase them, or did?
So they were in place before I even came into this role.
Okay.
I don't know the history.
You don't know how that
actually knocked on these doors.
So yeah, what we started to do back during the crisis or the situation table model was to connect with the CMHA to understand how we can share information. So the MOU is more about how do we access your data so we can make informed decisions about our response model.
And have the right people able to do that. Yeah.
And another piece of this too is with the Reach Out Center for Kids, which is Halton's lead agency for youth and child mental health supports, is we have an MOU with them now where if we go to a scene and we connect and we want to refer them to this ROC agency, they might have 24 hours to reconsider or change their mind, or the stigma comes in. They don't want to be known as that family in that neighborhood, so they don't follow through with that referral. So we launched a couple of years ago, just before the pandemic, an MOU where we can get their consent at the time during crisis when emotions are high and we're seeing what's being presented by that child or youth, and that referral goes right away, and they can't recant, which gives them the support in the following 24 hours, which is so important, and that's why these MOUs truly work and save lives.
And that's what we're working on right now with ADAPT. So we're always looking at ways on how we can, enhance what we're doing through partnership.
Well, thanks for bringing it to the board. We get a lot of presentations. I think this has been a really good one. Thank you.
Thanks, Kurt. Ingrid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I see the picture that you like, Sergeant.
It's a popular one, yes.
I want to say thank you for an excellent presentation and something that we all read about and hear about on a daily basis. But it gives us great comfort to know that the efforts that are being expended are leading edge. And I want to thank you too, Inspector Craddock, for sharing a very difficult story, your own situation. And we can only be happy that it was concluded successfully.
Thank you, and I think it's important that, you know, there are a lot of success stories, and I think sometimes we hear about what goes wrong, but, you know, you saw how many interactions we have with people that are in crisis, and as Rick said, these are just mental health calls. We're also coming in and dealing with mental health and addiction and other social disorders through, you know, the other calls that our members respond to. And, you know, for the number of calls that we're going to, we have really successful outcomes. And there's people that are really coming out the other side. And part of it is because of this holistic approach that we're taking.
I think the partnerships are absolutely wonderful and absolutely necessary. The question that comes to mind is when we deal with the nurse, the registered nurse, or the social worker, from St. Joseph's Hospital in Hamilton, what happened to Joseph Brent? Would they not play a role?
So the thing with St. Joe's is that they started their mobile crisis rapid response team. They're kind of looked at as the gold standard. And at the time when we were wanting to do this back in 2016-17, why not partner with the best? And they were part of, so the whole Lynn Ontario Health Team boundaries. Joseph Brain was part of the Hamilton, Halton, Lynn. They had it already in place, so why reinvent the wheel?
Right. Yeah.
Well, we certainly see the need for expansion of what is happening within HRPS, and simply because of the societal pressure. So we can only hope that the funding continues, because there will be more need for it.
To put the local lens on the hospital systems here, and one of the things that we've been doing over the last year is offering our local hospitals, Halton Healthcare and Joseph Brand Hospital, with the opportunity to do ride-alongs with our mobile crisis teams. Their emergency room staff, their psychiatric emergency room staff as well, to come out and see what the teams actually do, what the police actually do before they get to the occurrence, but then also see the benefit of having that mental health support on scene. So we've had a lot of people coming through the island to the point where there's been 2 people from Halton Healthcare of Oakville Trafalgar Hospital, who are nurses there, that are now working part-time for St. Joe's to work in a mobile crisis role.
Seeing it directly is certainly impactful.
So kind of my big dream would be to get them to see the benefit of it locally.
Right.
For then, if St. Joe's isn't able to expand, maybe we could expand with another Ontario Health team as well.
Keep up the wonderful work. Thank you.
Fred.
Thanks. I know there's some more questions, so I'll try to be brief. That's fascinating. Thank you very much. I believe there was 1,100 calls per year that the crisis response team responds to. How many mental health calls is HRPS responding to a year?
Last 2021, we were just over 4,000 mental health priority calls.
So how many of those do you think should be responded to by a crisis response team?
Every single one.
So what is preventing the establishment of sufficient teams?
Collaboration, funding with external partners.
Resources.
Human
resources.
So with that addition of that third team that I spoke about, we received one-time funding. Many police services across the province also received that one-time funding to expand their current program. So we expanded to one team. Other services expanded.
So
there's only so many employees out there.
The funding, so it's grant funding, right? Provincial government. What is that actually paying for?
Right now, the entire funding that we received is going, we give to St. Joe's Hospital to pay for
The salary.
Of
the mental health worker, the crisis worker.
So, and just outside the box, and there's probably some good reasons, but I just wanted to air it out anyway, because I've always wondered this: what's preventing HRPS from hiring those mental health professionals into its ranks?
I don't think there's anything preventing. It's more about the access that as a medical professional, because they have access to the hospital database to see what appointments they've had, what medications they're on, whether emergency room visits they've had.
And not all of them. A lot of them come from different parts of the healthcare system. And so, you know, to hire them in directly and to have an expectation that they would do this line of work for 30 years, because it is exhausting. Like, it is, you know, just as they're dealing with so many people in crisis, we're also very aware of the mental health of our own teams. One of the challenges in this region is we're a really large region, and so if you have a team responding, you know, up to the far north end or out to West Burlington or East Oakville, it takes time for them, and so part of, you know, part of the day is making it to those calls.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris.
I think the chief has comments.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to money. So it's partly funding for the mental health workers. If you figured that we're going to a third of the mental health calls, we have to triple the number of MCERT teams. So if we needed to put 6 more officers into those teams, that would be $600,000 or $700,000 a year. But we struggle every year trying to keep up with growth in this region. So we also have pressures on our platoons. We're decreased some investigative
calls anyway.
Sorry?
They're going to the calls right now.
Yeah, on a 24-hour basis.
Health expert.
Yeah, and we have seen, you know, this is why we've invested so heavily in that crisis intervention training. And I don't have the number, but we've put through like so many people. And it's why we've invested in the front desk operators, because they're dealing with people coming in crisis, and communicators are dealing. And so we've really tried to invest also in that education and training so that we know we can't send a crisis team to every crisis call, but we are confident that we're sending educated, well-trained, compassionate officers to those.
Yeah, the more people that end up getting that CIT training, if I had that other screen pulled up with the statistics, I'm saying that in 2011, over 50% of the people that were encountered by the police service were apprehended. Now we're down to 40% of 4,000. And that's, the road officers are going to the majority of those calls. So their skills are getting better to identify people who actually need to go to the hospital.
And we rotate officers in to the comments with us. We take them into backfill so that they actually get that exposure and experience of working with a crisis team. And our goal is that when they go back to their home unit or to their platoon, that they've built on that skill set already.
Sure. Awesome.
Part of the narrative that hasn't been shared too is that it takes a really special person to do the mental health worker piece. And it's hard to get people interested in that. And the pandemic, and just in response to the defund narrative and policing, is a lot of people are looking at the policing sector and saying, why are they going to mental health? So why would I want to be part of that system of collaboration when it should be the health system that does it? So there's a bandwidth issue, and it's not CMHS's fault. It's just that it's hard to attract that kind of talent to get them into a role that's very stressful on them.
The ones that we do get in, though, they love their jobs. Like, well, and because they're seeing that, and it's in a very non-enforcement, traditional policing way, and you know, they tell us all the time, like, they love coming in. It's for a unit that's dealing with a lot of high stress and high risk, it's a pretty happy, productive unit.
Thank
you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation and for sharing your story. It was a really informative presentation. I enjoyed it. You actually were just touching on the questions I had about the CIT. I was interested in understanding more about that, how many of our members have undergone the training, and I think you just said you don't have the numbers, but also the future outlook of that. Is that going to be, you know, kind of kept as an annual program and, you know, updating our members on that type of training?
Yeah, so right now we run one crisis intervention course a month, not during the summer because of staffing levels. We can accommodate up to 30 members for each one of those trainings. I would say within the next year, we'll get to the point where the only people that will need that initial training are our new people. And then there has been talks with our training unit to develop potentially a refresher course. But we're also starting to embed it into block training, annual block training, to try and touch up on some things as well.
And then I just had a follow-up question about, you mentioned that some people will decline third-party support. So I'm just wondering, what's the follow-up on that? Because, you know, when something tragic happens, if you see, like you mentioned, it's in the notes and so agencies knew about it, do we do a follow-up? Do those agencies do a follow-up?
Yeah, so
Maybe this person's changed their mind or...
So sometimes we kind of leave it to those external agencies to do what their mandate is. Trying to avoid the, why haven't you done this, what else are you doing? So a lot of times we leave it. Here for HRPS, we do have our social workers in each of our districts that do some follow-up with our complex service navigator that I mentioned at the end. She doesn't really let things go, which is one of the huge benefits of her role. But there is follow-up, but there's only so many times you can reach out to somebody. I'll give you an example of that. This was a person who actually used to send the chief some animal parts. There was a lot of police occurrences involved. The complex service navigator got involved to speak with him, and he actually wanted help. He had a lot of medical issues, mental health issues, homelessness, things like that. So she worked with him extensively. There was no more mail deliveries. They got him to the point where, so he was a very large man, he was sleeping in houses on cots. She got him to the point where he had supportive housing arranged in Burlington, actually a really nice apartment along the lake shore. The day before he was to move in, he called her and said, I can't do it. Sometimes people get into that state of, this is how my life is. Some people think I don't deserve the help. Like, there's so many different elements to it, but got him to the point where had this, but he just couldn't accept it and move forward.
I think too, like, mental health is so complex, and so, you know, one of the things that we look at is we'll sometimes receive a call from a family member or a neighbor. We get involved from a police response, and we learn that these are people that are living with mental health in the community, and they have food, and they have housing, and they have supports, and there's this expectation that we need to do something. We don't come into a call and just walk away and say, you said you don't want help and we're gone. We're looking at, is this person safe? Can they, you know, function in the community without intervention? But, you know, we also have Section 17 of the Mental Health Act for those people that really aren't at a position to, and don't have the capacity at that moment to make that determination. And that's when we do get involved. And then as Rick said, for those ones that kind of are in between where they don't need an apprehension, but they're not maybe recognizing that they need help and support, then we do send things to the social worker, we send things to the COAST team, and then the CSN role is, you know, this is a position that really should be carrying about 5 cases, who is carrying 30, because these are those high complex calls that our frontline members just can't dedicate the time and resources to. And, you know, for the very most part, she works those cases to the end, and the outcomes, like the letters we receive on her role alone are just unbelievable.
And it's just providing her the opportunity and the time to work on those cases.
Darren?
Chair, excellent initiative. I just wanted to congratulate you on the initiative. In terms of, I guess we talked about funding. If there was anything immediate that wasn't being done, what would that be?
Anything immediate in what we're in the mental health delivery? You know, really, I think it's that expansion piece of being able to have more teams, to be able to provide more coverage, to be able to get more calls. We do a really, and they know that when I think something's not working while I speak out, but we do a really good job on providing, you know, that holistic, that whole 360 model with what we have. But again, you know, could we do more with funding, with resources? We could, right? We could do the calls that we're not responding to. The CSN role is something that, you know, when I talk about what keeps me up at night, that role is one of them as well, because if we lose that, because it is based on a funding and not a long-term funding, then I think we're going to be giving up a lot of you know, really the positive work that we're doing.
Just a second question. How much are the grants, like the funding from grants, really devoted to your programming? Is it 50%? Is it 40%?
It's it's a little bit complex. There's like the community safety and well-being grant that is partly funding some of the work that we're doing. There's the expansion grant that we had for MCERT that I believe was a 2-year.
We ended up with 1 year, and it was $120,000.
And then the HRCIF, the Halton Region Fund, is helping support the CSN role.
So all money that we've received, so for the additional team, 100% of that funding went to St. Joe's Hospital to provide us with an employee.
Worker.
Okay, but in absolute figures, it's roughly 200.
Well, and then the CSWB grant also goes within, it comes in to help support some of the other work that we're doing, and I don't have that exact number, but it's a larger amount.
Thank you very much. Further questions from the board? Don, you're next.
Yes, thank you very much. I was most impressed with everything, but in particular, the image of the crisis team badge and the effect that it had on the individual. This might be more relevant for Metro, but if we can ever talk to them in their native language, and we are a composite of many different ethnic bases here in Halton, but more so perhaps in Toronto. Do we have that resource available to us if we know the individual's first language?
Yeah, so even on our mobile crisis rapid response teams, our officers are becoming a little bit more diverse that represent the community. But then also when they do their follow-ups with the external partners, there is attempts to be made to have an interpreter attend or somebody within those external organizations who potentially speak that same language or from the same culture to help build that. The crime, make it a little bit easier for that person. So part of it is we are doing some things, but also the external partner is doing whatever they can as well.
Not to put a number to it, but would you guess how many different languages that we could offer right now, if need be?
No. Within our team, I would say approximately 5 within our immediate mobile crisis team officers.
Okay. It's an area of growth. Yeah, it's an area of potential growth, in other words.
Yes, definitely.
I think the chief has something to offer.
Okay.
I mean, we also have a variety of translation services available to us on an on-call basis, and we're looking at different automated programs that might help in that way too. So we would never have someone that's on staff that spoke every language. I don't think that, but we have resources that help us when that's a difficulty.
And it really hasn't been a barrier for us that we've seen. It hasn't been something that has been really brought forward, because when we're dealing with people in crisis, a lot of times we'll also have family members present, and they can help translate if we need to. And then, as the chief said, we do have translation services, and then we have access internally to other officers that aren't working within our area that speak a variety of languages. So
another thing that's being explored right now too is exploring other mental illness training sessions with different cultural groups as well. Over the last few years, there's been a few different cultural groups specifically that have developed cultural mental health training, and we're going to be moving on with that at some point.
In these training sessions, is there an opportunity to do any role playing?
Yes, with the crisis intervention training course, the 40 hours, the very last day is all scenario-based training. Where we have actors that come in to play a very real role. It's kind of unsettling at times how well they can play the role. And then the officer and the team, they're critiqued on how they interacted with that person.
And it's also incorporated into our training through our training unit. So it's not just, the crisis intervention training is very specific to that, but then as the officers come through their block training and their annual requalifications, mental health scenarios is also a part of that.
Excellent. So you're definitely on the right path. One very quick last question, and I don't mean to be so gender specific, but has there been any measurement in respect to de-escalation if the officer is a female as opposed to a male?
I don't have any statistics on that, but I can think of several occurrences off the top of my head that have worked both ways, where the female member who didn't get the response, a nice response, and they had to switch out with a male. It's gone both ways, honestly.
Okay, thank you. Excellent responses. Much appreciated. Keep up the good work.
Thanks, Don. I have a few questions. The first one is with respect to actually dealing with the hospital. So with the MCERT program, I imagine many of the cases that you're dealing with end up in a transportation to a hospital situation. How does offload challenge impact the program and the budget? Because I know that in my years on health and social services of the region, I constantly heard from the chief of the ambulance or the EMS about the mass amount of money that we're spending on having resources sitting around waiting for somebody to take responsibility for a patient. How does that impact this program? Doesn't sound like
it does have an impact. Our average wait times, our median wait times are around an hour. There are some outliers that are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours in wait. There's been a lot of work done with the hospitals to try and figure out ways to get through it. We've done some initiatives with transfer of accountability, where before we take a person in crisis to the hospital, we'd have to wait whether or not the hospital would inform them, keep them against their will, or release them. Now we've got a risk level that if they're low risk, the hospital can take accountability before they actually see a doctor. But the struggle that we've had for a few years is the staffing levels. We can bring somebody to the hospital who could meet that low threshold that the hospital could take accountability before a doctor does. But if the hospital doesn't have the staffing levels to actually care for that person, then it's hard to actually make that transition work.
Yeah, and it's why it's so important. You know, the crisis teams are doing an amazing job of diverting away. And as Rick went through, you know, that is the goal, is to be able to divert out of the hospital system, out of the judicial system. We're seeing over the last couple of months, like every headline out there is showing that, you know, when we bring somebody in, they have to be medically cleared. There is a triage process that we have to go through. And, you know, unfortunately, we're becoming part of that queue, and we're seeing the wait times. You know, again, there's some circumstances and some calls where the wait times are very high. But, you know, for the volume that we're bringing in, it's still fairly reasonable. So we have regular conversations and meetings with both Halton Healthcare and St. Joe's, just to keep the lines of communication open and make sure that we're all doing our part to, you know, sort of be able to get people transferred quickly and be able to get members back out on the road.
And that's part of our training as well, to try and get it so our officers are only bringing the people who need to go to the hospital to the hospital.
Makes sense. Are you being impacted by the redirect phenomenon that's going on right now, that the hospitals are, you know?
Not done with, no.
And in that same vein, you partner with St. Joseph's. So what hospitals are you generally transporting potential cases to? Is it St. Joe's? Is it Joe Brand, OTMH? Is it depending on the neighborhood?
So if it's an apprehension in Burlington, that person will go to Joseph Brand. If it's in Oakville, Milton, Halton Hills, they'll go. If it's just mental illness related, they'll go to Oakville. If somebody was apprehended in Halton Hills and there was a medical component, if they're having chest pains or whatever it may be, then they have to go to the closest hospital.
But they're all staying within the region.
Yeah. But if it was actually a mental health issue, they'd be transported to OT.
Yeah, so the person should go to what's classified as a Schedule 1 mental health facility. In Oakville, Trafalgar is that designated here, and Joseph Brand for the other hospital system.
Now, you said one of the benefits of having the program, I guess, originate through St. Joseph's and not be a staff member or a team member here at HRPS was the fact that that gives them access to records and information. Does that actually apply across the board to Halton Healthcare hospitals and such? So would a St. Joseph's employee have access to records at OT, for example?
Sometimes. It depends on their integrated healthcare system.
They're not part of the same OHP.
Oakville, Trafalgar is different from Joseph Brand. So it all depends on what system it gets inputted in. I know they're working towards a more integrated system, but everything isn't available yet.
Which would obviously be a big benefit if that were the case. Yeah. The 16-plus caveat on the COAST program, I didn't actually realize that. That's one thing I'm taking away today of information, which is actually kind of disappointing. What are the challenges around that limitation that you find, or is the partnership with ROC sufficient that it mitigates the impacts or the challenges that might correct?
So one of the challenges would be is that if there's a family experiencing crisis, sometimes there's youth involved. What I will say about CMHA, when they do those reach out, if there is youth, they will make their own connections with appropriate service providers. There's just not, if it's just a 13-year-old specifically, that's why we've taken that initiative to then try and send it on to the Reach Out Center for Kids. Numbers-wise, like I said, 4,000 mental health calls last year, 2021. I think approximately 400 of those would have been youth. So it is reduced. Ultimately, it would be nice to have one standard partnership for all of that. We don't have that.
That was actually my next question. What is the evolution of this program to get to that point where instead of having different pots and different programs and different, caveats for these different programs, is there a future where we can see a consolidated approach to this?
There is actually work going on right now.
So Brock is a leader internationally on access and system navigation, and CMHA, the new CEO, used to work for Brock, and so there's a great synergy in terms of understanding how they should work together. So it's actually one of our priority action investigative deals with our system leadership group, and so they are working on a one-door process where it doesn't matter what age you are, you call one number and you get referred to the best supports, and then we can integrate with that in terms of our crisis response. So the work is in motion, and we have the right players in those roles, those leadership roles, to make this happen. So we're really excited to see what happens with this action table.
That sounded quite challenging. If you dispatch one particular team and you discover at the other end of that there's children involved, and having to connect the other just seems overly bureaucratic and unnecessary. But I'm glad to hear there's some cooperation. Has anybody done in terms of justifying the funding? I mean, clearly, anecdotally, we can justify the funding just by our call-outs, just by what we understand occurring in the community. Has anybody done a cost-benefit analysis of reduction upstream costs, policing, and justice costs? I mean, surely, anytime we spend $1 on prevention, we're saving $10 on justice and enforcement. Has anybody ever done a cost-benefit analysis locally to demonstrate to funders the value of expanding this program to potentially reduce the costs of again, that upstream policing, that upstream justice costs?
Not that I'm aware of, and one of the things that I find that we don't often report on is even just officer wages that get saved when we're not responding. I can, Peggy, who's in that CSN role, was working with a specific individual who had 70 interactions with the police prior to her becoming involved, and now that's down to 0, which is a significant cost savings in terms of officer, time and salary, but it's not something that I'm aware of. We do a lot of reporting. We obviously have a lot of analytics when it comes to having to report back on the government grants that we receive. But a lot of that is in terms of how many people we've trained, reducing hospital wait times, interactions.
Having some of that information may be useful to those of us that hang out at these conferences and such, where we're talking to ministers and staff to say, these are the benefits of expanding this program. It's not just a nice photo op, it's actually going to mean real savings, not just of human lives and of our, our mental health in general, but it's also what drives all these machines. I know Rick kept hesitating talking about money all the time, but it really boils down to that's really the real bottleneck in all of this. So
if you take our apprehension percentage drop, that's cost savings right there. So we're taking less people to the hospital, there's cost savings right there. And as far as the quantitative, one of the things that I've struggled with for several years is that it's kind of hard for us sometimes to say this intervention prevented this much. We've kind of focused a lot of times on the hospital wait times, but that's kind of out of our hands as well. So what we've been looking at is that if we can reduce the amount of apprehensions, that reduces hospital wait times overall, and that's the one cost area that I could come up with.
Well, I could see a cost benefit in the fact that if you were able to intervene in a particular case, you're going to reduce the number of call-outs for our service as well, and that also.
And even, we a lot of times get called into very high-risk person in crisis calls that are able to be de-escalated before they become a much larger police response, right? So these teams come in and do a lot of, for lack of a better term, negotiation and de-escalation, and they're able to, even just the crest you saw there where they're like, oh, okay, now we know we'll go. Some of those calls do eventually escalate into a barricaded person, or we have to call a much stronger police presence, which is costly. And so, you're right, we don't always do a great job of tracking what cost savings are because we're really just tracking kind of just that initial response. So it's a great question.
And not to mention the societal cost of those things.
100%.
Getting, just the impact on families and
the public.
And the public, but also the justice system. Because the minute that you get into a barricade situation, like now all of a sudden we trigger a justice process as well, which is, we know how expensive and slow moving that is. But if we can find some way to have some elevator conversation kind of points to make, I'd certainly be willing to, when I'm talking to the various people, really, put a sales pitch into, continue to find ways to expand the funding envelope for this. Two more quick questions. I know Kurt has another one.
That was Dawn speaking. Oh, fine. Okay. From, because the broadcast, I guess, is delayed.
What sort of training do officers have? Let me rephrase this. Thinking about the graduation last night and all those wonderful 12 people that just joined your ranks, what kind of training do they have at Ontario Police College to face these kind of situations? I kept hearing last night about, they're going to be sent out to the field to see unimaginable situations, and we all know that intuitively, but how are they prepared for that coming into these roles? Because obviously they'll be filling some of these officer roles as they progress through their career as well.
So I can just say from a very recent experience with my own kids, this is a lot of what the training they're receiving is, very scenario-based as well, where they're actually being put in a situation to de-escalate and to recognize somebody's in crisis, not necessarily this is a criminal call, but Inspector Laframboise here, who just came out of our training unit, so I'm not sure if you have any, more than just my kid went to OPC information.
I might have to get back to you on that. We've liaised with them. They have a previous inspector that's now a part of their training program, so he's enhancing it. That was one of the topics that had come up, because they're looking at enhancing the mental health piece and the crisis response, but it is mostly scenario-based at this point.
And I think, we're very aware as police leaders and police organizations that 80% of the interactions we have are non-criminal. And that's a number that's fairly consistent across, definitely Ontario and across the country. And so at the police college level, there's also that awareness that we have to teach people the law and we have to teach them use of force. We also have to teach them how to deal with that 80% that is non-enforcement related. And so, again, just from my own son graduated a year ago, we talk a lot about this and we talk a lot about mental health and it is definitely something that they are being placed into scenarios, and a big thing was, that recognition of a person in crisis and then how to navigate and de-escalate that situation. So.
From my time at OPC, there wasn't a lot of mental illness training. That was 16 years ago, so I imagine it's expanded. We're expected to know so much, and they're fresh ones. So my understanding would be is that they're really getting the basics for all the different parts of the job. And then when they come back to their home services, that's where you really get into giving some of the local knowledge, but also expanding on that base knowledge as well.
And we just spend time with the recruits this week going through, before they even get out into the field. When they come back here, we definitely invest in that mental health. So we just spend time with them this week.
With the new recruits, at one point, we were having all new recruits when they came back from the Ontario Police College. Within 2 weeks of coming back, they would do the 1-week crisis intervention course. We don't do that anymore. Because they were so much information that they wouldn't have the basic the police role, being out there on the road. So it really wasn't beneficial to them at that point. We were just giving them too much information. So now with CIT, we give them the opportunity to be on the road, work with your coach officer, get a little bit of experience, let them feel comfortable in their role a little bit more. Then we top up with additional training there.
I guess I'm just glad to hear that it is being ingrained in the overall programming of the educational portion of your journey. That this is now really part of policing.
It is a big part of policing.
As opposed to suddenly arriving and saying, I didn't know I was going to have to deal with this. So I'm glad to hear that. Deputy Hill, you had your hand up.
Like Jay's going to say, same thing, but even at the police calls, policing in general, we're very much focused on de-escalation now, and all of our training is going that way. It's not like what, 16 years ago, it obviously had a different context, but we've learned over the years, and now it is about, de-escalation. And the OACP education and training groups, they talk about these things, we're focused on it. When they come back to the police, before they leave, when they come back to us, we focus on it, including the mental health component. I think the chief was going to mention. So to answer the question specifically of how many people received the CIT training, we've got 767 sworn members altogether. 538 members have already received it. We've got 65 people scheduled before the end of this year. So that's about 70%. And if you consider a lot of our people are people like us, maybe that might not use it, we've done a good job so far of making sure everybody has that training because we do recognize how important it is.
There is just like scheduling with people on and off shifts and, Okay. Well, thank you for your answers. I really appreciate that. And I'll let Kurt.
I think my question has been answered, Mr. Chair, with your follow-ups.
Thank you very much.
My satisfaction. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. As you can tell by the number of questions and the level of interest, you certainly hit an important point in our education as a board, and to better understand your roles and our responsibilities to make sure that we're equipping you with the necessary tools and resources to do your jobs in this regard. So thank you very much for that, and look forward to future updates.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time.
Members of the board, can I get a motion to receive the verbal presentation? Thanks, Kurt. Seconded by Nav. Thank you very much. All in favor? That's received. Thank you. Moving on, and I'm sorry, it's going to be a little light moving on to Chris, board governance policy. Sure, we could.
Chair, it's awfully cold in here.
I've been the temperature. Okay. Let's do two things. Let's have I need to declare a short bio break. So let's reconvene at 10:35, and somebody will adjust the temperature or get Ingrid's sweater.
You get a heater.
It's so soft.
It's soft.
I'm getting a little bit warm in here.
No, it's
We need to switch seats then. Switch seats.
That's the hormones there.
I find it
We're not going to have the clerk then.
Yeah, but just the temperature. Yeah, it takes, I actually heard the fans like, it takes a moment.
I'm sure the rest of the people aren't going to be breaking out in sweat.
I know, that's perfect. I sweated so much last night at the graduation ceremony.
No, I am.
Beautiful.
Oh, are you? Yes, I heard.
It's just cold enough.
My God, it's summer. It's 23 degrees outside.
Oh, I got arthritis in one ankle and tendonitis in the other. I'm ready to go down. I'm going to college.
I'm retired now. And what were you doing before you were retired? Structural engineer. Structural engineer. What was a day in the life like as a structural engineer? Well, I mean, you would work.
Minä kaipaan joskus näiden sykkien pilvien keskellä iloa, valoa ja hauskuutta. Ja sitten löytyy kaikennäköistä kuvamateriaalia ja kaikennäköistä videomateriaalia, mitä en itse haluaisi nähdä. Mitä minä tiedän, että te ette haluaisi nähdä. Ja siitä huolimatta sitä meille kaikille näytetään. Se on yksityistä, se on iloa ja se on elämää. Mutta yhtään työpäivää en ole jättänyt tekemättä. Yhtään työtehtävää en ole jättänyt hoitamatta. Eikä yhtään tämänkään hetkellä, koska kaikki nämä väistyvät. Ja meidän pitää yhdessä rakentaa tästä maasta potentiaalia. Ja alle sen matkan, kun ihmisistä Utsjoelle, meillä on venäläisiä ystäviä Ukrainassa, Kiovassa, Ei on paljon vaikeampaa. Näinä päivinä minä olen ajatellut presidentti Zelenskiä, pääministeri Mihailia, minä olen ajatellut Ukrainan kansaa ja ihmisiä, jotka oikeasti kärsivät, joilla on oikeasti vaikeaa. Minä otan opiksi. Minä teen niin hyvin kuin tähänkin asti.
Oh, I was at the graduation. Very easy. I get an alert with Brett. Try to control Dawn.
Calling the room to attention.
You can have a piece of my muffin if you want. I don't need it. I grab my eggs sous vide at Starbucks on the way in.
I always put.
You have a breakfast? Eggs?
Yep. And then meet on the way out the door.
Yeah, so much as I like it.
I've been challenged on it.
So do I, and I'm telling you what I know before.
Gary, you think that?
I sort of market it as a healthy alternative.
Yeah, I got that.
Because somebody thought we're Brian.
But they're big.
Raisins. I used to like raisins.
The big test that they have since you.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody, we're going to call the meeting back to order, and I will pause for a moment so Fred can get back to the table discreetly. Next up actually is Fred. He's going to give us a governance policy recap. As everybody is aware, this is one of the most important things that we've done as a board is to redo our policies and our whole governance structure. And this is the recap and where we've come so far. So Fred, without further ado, take it away.
Thanks, Jeff. And I assumed you asked for this because we've had a bit of a summer recess. I'm also presenting your governance policy framework in a couple of weeks at the CAPG conference in September in Saskatoon. So that's kind of like a dry run, so any feedback would be great as well. This is to help situate you again as to what is the role of the Halton Police Board, because situational awareness, I think, is one of the key factors to board effectiveness. Any mental anguish is an unintended consequence. So be upfront about that. To build off last presentation. And if anybody is feeling particularly stressed, we know there are resources right here at Halton Police Service to help. So with that, let me get going. So by way of outline, I'll just remind you what the governance policy framework is. Some of the highlights of each of the 11 governance policies, recap the pitfalls to avoid in police governance, as well as the it is governance checklist. The last two items are from last summer's retreat that we had at the in Burlington.
RBG.
At the RBG, yeah. So these are the 11 governance policies. In no particular order: governance commitment, the board job description, the methodology, board member obligations, chair's role, et cetera, right through to the newest one, which is before you today, chief to board communications. It more or less kind of looks like this. At the very center is the board's commitment to the community, the governance commitment, and the other 10 policies basically build on and fully describe how the board governs. And of the governance policies, there's the 11 governance policies. There are two other buckets of board policies. One is the administrative ones, which include such things as HR and finance, and the other one's the operational bucket, which is largely driven by the provincial adequacy standard regulations. So each of the governance policies kind of follows this general outline. There's a the policy's purpose or a statement of intent, the requirements of the policy for compliance, or it's the direction part, and then there's a reporting back about compliance or non-compliance, and or an evaluation piece built in for each of the 11 policies. The first one is your commitment to the community, and essentially is ensuring that police actions and results are congruent with community needs, values, and expectations. And this is right in the policy. It's the relationship diagram where the community as a whole is the owners of the service. The board represents that community as a whole in governing the police service, which is led by the chief, the board's connection to the service, and then the service is providing, the police service is providing services to the individuals in the community. And there's an interconnection between each of those entities. The board's role, which is essentially summarizing that board commitment to the community. Your self-stated role is to ensure that policing actions and results are congruent with the community's needs, values, and expectations. And this is how you have chosen to define adequate and effective policing. The legislation specifically asks for adequate and effective policing, which is not defined anywhere. So how you define it, it's all relative to Halton region. So the governance methodology, the third policy now, how you're governing, is broken into two parts: principles and requirements. The principles, there's several of them here, I think 7. First is to serve the public interest, focus on outcomes, make a clear distinction between the board's lane and the chief's lane, to encourage a diversity of viewpoints and avoid groupthink, to deliberate and make decisions that are forward-looking, as well as strategic, proactive, and informed, or evidence-based. It's often the term used in the police sector. And finally, that the primary decisions are collective rather than individual. Obviously, there are certain things that are delegated to a committee or to the chair or to staff, but that is, the decision to delegate is a collective decision. And that's also a legislative requirement. In terms of the requirements of the methodology, that the board functions as an unobstructed team, that the expertise of any one member will not trump the board's judgment as a whole or the independent advice of the board's advisors, myself, counsel, your HR advisor. The board will inspire and direct the service through strategic policies and strategic plans and evaluating the chief and the service. That the strategic policy and planning focus is on the attainment of enduring outcomes and not on the means of attaining those results. That's important differentiation from many types of governance. The board's the initiator of policy rather than the reactor to demands and requests. The board stresses on continuous learning, which I guess this is a recap version. And certainly the session before me was a great learning opportunity, and there's another one in Saskatoon coming up with CAPG in a couple of weeks. And the board will conscientiously enforce its own rules. So I guess this is a reminder of some of those rules. The board member obligations then is another piece, another policy, and essentially that all the members will uphold and abide by the laws, policies, and decisions of the board. Everyone will comply with the provincial code of conduct, which you've all signed in your swearing in, and as well as a confidentiality agreement. That you'll participate in board training. That you contribute to the fulfillment of the board's role, and everyone will refrain from preempting, obstructing, or distracting the board from its role. The chair's role then, jokes and coffee and donuts. The chair's role is, and again, this is different than the way some boards are run in various sectors, but the chair's role is to facilitate the group's decision-making, not to make the decisions for the group. The chair is to ensure that the board's discussions are fair, open, relevant to the role, thorough, timely, and orderly. And that's sort of what you're assessing them on at the end of every year. The chair acts as a spokesperson to the media and outside parties, and the chair directs staff in accordance with the board's policies and decisions, meaning that it has to be consistent. The board chief relationship, which is the primary relationship that the board has with the service by legislation. It outlines the chief's role legislatively, which is surprisingly straightforward in the legislation. It talks about the symbiotic relationship between the board and the chief, each being an interdependent role. I'll expand on that in a moment. That the board only directs the chief, no other member of the service, by legislation. And that direction has to be by resolution to be binding. That's one of the reasons why the action registry is populated with resolutions only. That all the reporting to the board is at meetings, except in an emergency, and that's subject of the 11th policy before you later today. It also has provisions for acting chief to ensure continuity of governance of the service and an annual evaluation. This is a summary of the difference between governing and managing from our retreat over a year ago. And trying to use words to distinguish between the two lanes. This diagram talks about the governance management symbiosis. So if we look at it this way, the board assesses and articulates the community's needs, values, and expectations. The chief informs the board of what's achievable and at what cost and risk. From that, the board establishes results-based objectives and priorities for policing. That's the board's part of the strategic plan, and as well as policy direction, like the policy on designated major events that you adopted in June. The chief reports on organizational performance relative to the strategic objectives as well as policies, like policy expectations. The board makes an evaluation of the organization based on those reports, directs any corrective action, which might be to the service or to the expectations or to the policies, may be changed. And then, that's updated and the chief reports, or if it's staff, directed to board staff, what the adjustments are, and the whole cycle comes again. So both are dependent on information from the other. Any board management relationship, management's full-time, boards are not. Management has the bulk of the information, boards do not. So boards are certainly dependent on management for information, and usually by law or statute or charter, management is dependent on the board for delegations, permissions, approvals. The seventh one is the governance calendar, and it's the one that's probably the greatest work in progress because it's dependent on the other two buckets, the administrative policy developments and the updates to the operational policies, and we haven't got the new regulations yet from the province, so still waiting out on that. But it includes such things as board member orientation, and we may likely be in a cycle of that post-election, depending on what kind of turnover we have in membership. Talks about educational workshops, policy and bylaw review, the strategic planning cycle, employment contract cycle bargaining, budget development cycle, policy compliance reporting schedule. That's the part really that's dependent on the development of the other new policies. The annual report development cycle, and then management requests outside of the regular reporting cycle. The 8 policies on stakeholder engagement. If you recall, there was a couple different options to approaching this. The board chose this one. The purpose of the stakeholder engagement is to inform the board's strategic assessment of community values and expectations. The needs are largely informed by statistics, the values and expectations through stakeholder engagement. It's specifically not a forum for complaints about individual officers or individual specific police actions. There are oversight bodies for that purpose, namely OIPRD. It does not replace the services stakeholder engagement, which is largely about the clients. The boards is about the owners, different perspectives, same people. The board will proactively assign outreach liaisons by resolution. And there's no individual can bind the board in those engagements. It's really just a liaison function to bring back the information to feed into the board's assessment. The ninth policy is on board committees. The board has no standing committees. The purpose of committees is to assist the board in fulfilling its purpose without interfering or replacing the board. The committees don't have any any authority unless it's expressly conferred, and committees are used sparingly in an ad hoc capacity with specific goals, outcomes, and completion dates. So essentially, it's operating as a board as a whole, which good. good, I think. Governance support, so that's me and Graham and Kimberly. This is the purpose of governance support, is to support the board governance commitment, methodology, and the calendar without preempting, diverting, or obstructing it. There's a list of the things that are assigned to me and my team to support you in, primarily by preparing things for board decisions. There's also a provision about independent legal advice. So it's when we leverage Ken's, the in-house counsel, Ken, and when we go externally for independent legal advice. It's an important distinction. Also talks about the memberships of educational associations that the board belongs to, which essentially authorizes staff to maintain your memberships without coming back for approval every year. And then it talks about recognition of board members on their departure. The last one's before you today, Chief to Board Communications, and it basically expands on the standard information routing, and it also then talks about matters of immediate strategic significance, and this is all in the shadow of the convoy occupations of last winter in other jurisdictions. We're closing, so thank you for sticking with me on this. Some pitfalls boards should avoid. This is our list from last summer. To have unclear or absent policies. That's why you're going through this policy renewal process, because we didn't have any of these governance policies before. Quite frankly, they're all new. To not have performance verifications or evaluations. Another thing I'd say we've been light on and ramping up, started last year. Platitudes instead of evidence-based assessments is a pitfall to avoid. And those, I can give you tons of examples from around the police governance community, coast to coast, where I've heard unsubstantiated comments one way or the other about chiefs or services, and that's not good governance. Too much emphasis on compliance reporting and not enough on the future. In the Institute of Corporate Directors program, they do surveys of boards, and year after year after year, people say on boards that this is how much time we spent on the future, present and past, and the past one is 60% plus of the board's time. And they say, what do you want to spend your time on? And everybody wants it reversed so that the board's spending way more time talking about the future and deliberating about future expectations and enunciating those. And so it's always a struggle for any type of board to find the right balance. Trying to do management's job. Ron and I were having a discussion during the break about some boards doing exactly that. Letting management do the board's job. That's also a constant challenge in police governance, especially where the chief is strong and the boards are weak, either in knowledge or in constitution. Over-reliance on one person, anybody's input. Certainly the chief has been the primary source of input and advice. Allowing reports or discussions to drift into areas of insignificance. Micromanaging or allowing any one personality to dominate the board discussions or decisions. Yeah. Is it governance? This is the checklist that we went through also last year. Is it big? Is it about the future? Is it core to our mission? To ensure that police actions and consequences are congruent with community needs, values, and expectations? Or the rule? Is a high-level policy decision needed to resolve a situation? Is there a high-level risk? Is the watchdog watching? Like Rod. Does the chief want or need the board's support on it? So you don't have to check every one of those, but there should be a preponderance of those areas are touched on, or otherwise you need to ask yourself, why is the board spending time on it? There's the governance policy framework in a nutshell, with the last piece and some ongoing work on all of them, of course. So thank you. Are there any questions?
Kurt, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Fred. I've talked quite a bit about these policies at CAPG, and word comes back to me every once in a while. I tell them they're on our website, but word frequently comes back to me that, where are they on the website? And I'm just hoping that we can put a big button there somewhere.
Working on it. Yeah, okay, we're working on it.
We've done a great job, but we've hidden it.
So, once the 11th one is approved, if it is, that will trigger, put a big button on that and do just that.
Yeah, because I think before we go to Saskatoon, we're going to want a big button.
It's gonna be big.
Aye, Captain.
Well, the lapel button, is that what you're looking for? Like,
no.
Ask me about my policy?
No, on our website, but
yeah. Sure, that's a great idea, we're on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just on that, I'm wondering, when people ask you that, are they looking at the services site or are they looking at our site? Because I just quickly went back to our site and it's pretty there. I mean, yeah, we can have a button for sure, but it's not that hard to find. So maybe when we're...
maybe I should have you talk to everybody that I talk to.
I'll just follow you around.
No, is they're having problems just finding them on our website, not the services website, on our website.
Yeah, because they're not on the services website.
No. I tell people that they're on our website, and they say, where?
Oh, interesting, okay. Well, I guess it's good to get third-party validation on the navigation of our website. I found it quite easy and was quite happy with it, but certainly if the audience isn't finding it, then we need to do better, for sure. Thank you. Nev?
Yeah, I would suggest, I think it says about us.
Yeah.
And the policies are within that button.
Yeah, to move them up.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because it's not intuitive to everybody, is it, about us?
When you try to make a website as easy to navigate as possible, somebody's just going to find something that, we can find easier ways, other ways to.
It wouldn't be a nice word policy.
Yeah.
Right? I think it's clearer than about us.
Yeah. And it's so core to what we are and who we are, and particularly what we're engaged in at the moment. It probably makes some sense to really sell what we're good at, or what Fred's good at.
Yeah.
Your policy.
Anything further?
Thank you.
Just to thank you, Fred, for all your work on this, and thank you to the board members for your time and participation in making this happen. I've been on the board now for 10 years, and it's always been a challenge not to have clarity on these policies, and it's been such a joy as the chair to be able to have these to refer back to all the time. So thank you for empowering our CGO to create these, and thank you for your participation in making them happen. Today's presentation was not just a reminder to us about our policies and the progress report of where we're going, but these were intentionally being reported out on our public board YouTube stream, so that members of the public can understand a little bit about how we govern ourselves. And I think this really speaks well to us as a board and our progress as a board as well. So thank you to Fred once again for your hard work on this. And I've made a couple notes for you for speaking. Yeah, for Saskatoon, think ways that you may be able to add to more highlight some of these points to an audience that hasn't lived them. We have that lived experience as we've gone through them, so I'll share those with you later. Members of the board, can I get a motion to receive Fred's report, please? Thank you, Ingrid. Seconded by Pav. Thank you very much. All in favor? That's received. Okay. And I never thought of Ron as a watchdog, by the way, but thank you. That's what we wanted to be. We have 6 items on our consent agenda. Does anybody wish to separate any of those items, or are you prepared to deal with them en masse? Ingrid?
I just have a question on 3.1.
3.1, okay. Anybody else?
No, I have a question on the same one.
Anybody else on any of the other ones? Can I get a motion to approve 3.2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, please? Thank you, Nav. Seconded by? Pav? Thank you. All in favor? Okay, those are, we've just approved I'm sorry, which one did we hold again? 3.1. So we've just approved 3.2, which is financial report and forecast, second quarter, the purchasing activity report, July through December 2021, the capital projects program status for June 30th, 2022, trust fund statement June 30th, 2022, and the semi-annual board governance expenditure report. Those have been approved, and to members of the public, our consent agenda is largely, for your knowledge, an agenda of items that are largely routine in nature. All our board members thoroughly review all of these reports, and often questions are clarified before the board meeting, but again, they're routine in nature, and so we don't take up staff and resource time deliberating on some of those issues. So with that, we'll go to 3.1, and first up on that was, I think, Ingrid and then Kurt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to, what jumped out in the report on page 3, resignations in Q2, I see we're up to 9. We're up to 9, which is up from 2 in quarter 1. And the total in 2021 was 4. So I'm just wondering what has caused that significant rise to 9?
Yeah, certainly, I mean, Tracy's here as well. It's not a number that causes us any concern, I don't think, amongst our senior management team. We have had some officers over the past year leave the organization for, I would call it, country living with less expensive housing. But we've also hired just recently 6 experienced officers from other police services to replace them. So that's going to be a fact of life that I think we're dealing with continually, especially first-class officers. First, second-class constables are tremendously mobile if they want to be, and they're sought after. I have it on good, from a good source. I believe the RCMP are going to have to start to look at hiring experienced officers too. That could cause a further drain to some organizations. I don't think specifically Halton, but that is a number of those, correct?
I have a question about the officers that are being brought in from Toronto and Hamilton, which is item 4.3. Is it okay, Mr. Chair, to address that now, or to wait till we come to 4.3?
Oh, yeah. That's a confidential question.
Yeah.
Okay.
But they're all good.
Well, yes, I see. Very good representation. So you think the trend will continue, Chief?
I think we will continue to see some members leave for other geographic locations, even more so than different organizations. And I think we'll continue to see a trend of officers particularly from the east of us, looking at relocating out this way as well and seeing Halton as a preferred employer.
Maybe to Tracy, do we do exit interviews when people leave?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so that would give us some insight too, certainly with these 9.
Yes.
And is it primarily the cost of living here in Halton?
There's a multitude of reasons, and the chief has touched upon quite a few. Some of them have decided to leave policing altogether to explore other options, and others have gone to other areas for lower cost of living, but it's quite varied.
Yeah.
But we do have a summary of the reason, where they've gone, that we're going to be doing quarterly, providing to the deputies and the chief as well.
Well, it's great that you can replace the individuals that are leaving so efficiently.
Deputy Jeff?
One thing I just wanted to add, one of the challenges is one of the larger provincial services, because of the OPP, because they have a different pension plan, there's actually a financial incentive for so if you come from Temiskaming Shores, say, and you grew up there, if you're going to join the OPP and go there, not only is the cost different, you actually get a payback when you flip over pensions. So we have members who are getting, especially if they have some time on the service, they're averaging about $8,000 a year that they're getting back. So there's a financial incentive also. So the way we're countering that, and when we get back into the confidential part about where we're hiring people, and when we're looking at replacing the experience, we're doing basically the same thing that the other services are doing, is we're looking at people who live in our jurisdiction. So even when you go through the experience part and our recruits, you would have heard last night, that a lot of the people have connections to our region. And then we have a lot of experienced officers who don't work for us yet, but they also live in our region, so we are proactively approaching them, looking for the best that live in our region, and that way we're not going to have that disconnect later on, where they're going to try and run away and go to a different service for other reasons.
So some are going to the OPP.
A lot are going to OPP. Like, this is something that you see in, kind of 8-7 year cycles. The OPP has a lot of hiring that they need to do, and we've seen this in the past where it goes in cycles. We'll start seeing other services start approaching all the other services, not just us. It's provincial wide. And then what happens is what we're doing, what other services are doing, they start approaching other experienced officers, and we kind of.
But that's nothing new.
Not really, no. It's a little higher than now, and to Tracy's point, we are keeping track of two things, leaves of absences and the reasons why. To your point, exit interviews, which we do, it is policy for us to do with every single person that leaves, and we are keeping track and a summary of running total of why people are leaving, where they're going, and making sure there's nothing out of there that we shouldn't be addressing.
Just for any organization, it's always difficult to replace talent, experienced talent.
And that's why we're looking at the experience, and we all view ourselves as full-time recruiters, so that we're always constantly recruiting ourselves everywhere we go. And we look at, a certain amount of years on the job with a certain amount of training that once they learn our region, they're coming in with all the courses. Even though we're losing that type of training, when they go to another organization, those other people are bringing it back to us. So it's a bit of a trade-off.
Thank you.
Anecdotally, I was on a webinar recently through my business, and I can't remember what the person's title was, but it was somebody that talks about trends. I can't remember the terminology for that, but they talk a lot about this post-pandemic migration that's happening for a lot of employers, that people are shifting jobs or getting out of the job market altogether, and so there seems to be a lot of that in a lot of sectors. I know that in the municipal world we're seeing a lot of that as well. So.
Yes.
Kurt Tripnick, sir.
Yeah, I just noted on the civilian side, I think there's about 30 vacancies. And I just wondered if there was an explanation for that. And I guess one, is there an explanation? Two, is it causing hurt? Three, are there opportunities to redirect resources towards other areas such as electronic crime? Or I'm just curious about, I've been watching that civilian category now for some time, and the vacancies just seem to be continuing to rise. And I don't know if it's a priority, if it is a priority, or,
Yeah, I would say all three. All three are right. We have a higher number than we would like to have in vacancies. Yeah. We have hired in some particular positions, and it comes to my mind 911 dispatchers, where we hired 3 or 4 new dispatchers a while back, and 1 or 2 didn't make it in the position, another one decided it wasn't for them, so those positions become vacant again. We have ongoing processes to fill some, and I'll have Tracy speak to some of that. We have also reallocated or realigned some of the salary dollars from positions that we do not need as much anymore or don't need into some very prioritized positions within human resources where we've done some hiring just recently. So do you want to add anything to that, Tracy?
Sure. Just to add to that as well as we have, if you notice, there has been some movement. So as soon as someone departs from one role to some of these allocated roles that are new positions, it just seems higher than usual. If you look at the last quarter, it was 24.
So in reality, it's all this movement of people either changing roles or not fulfilling the obligations of the role, that now they're being reposted. So we're actually revisiting that over the next quarter to actually get a handle on it, to see the exact reasons why we're having all these shifts. But it's usually quite high because there's some that stay vacant for other reasons where we're reappropriating the role, and it just hasn't been defined yet. So they stay open longer than probably usual, and we're realigning our recruitment process and the timelines it takes us to fill the roles. And we have had offers, and then they fall through, and then you have to start over again. So then it kind of just comes twofold within each quarter.
Yeah, no, it really, I like, the answer, the thinking around repositioning, reprioritizing, that kind of thing. I'm happy to see that happening. I think that's a good thing. I just wanted to offer a comment as well on the first observation that Ingrid brought up. I don't worry about the 9 that have left. Maybe that's a little higher than in the past, but there are police agencies out there that are in dire need of people, as you know better than I do. And I think that, the models, the OPP and the RCMP model of hiring and moving and bouncing around and buying and selling a house every 2 or 3 or 4 years is in serious trouble. And I think Halton will net out on the plus side over the long term on all of that, those kinds of issues. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Chief.
Yeah, I only wanted to add that obviously these vacancies add to the positive surplus that we have right now in the financial report, and we'll deal with some of those dollars in a creative way to lessen the impact on the 2023 budget as we're moving forward on some different items. So there is a bonus to it, and then we prioritize the positions that we need to fill, and we're very thankful to have Tracy and now her new team here in place. So I would imagine we would introduce some other new members to the board in the not too distant future.
I was going to raise that when we got to the financial report. Maybe we can elaborate a little bit more on that when we get there, Chief, if that's possible. Thank you.
Further questions? Not seeing any. Can I get a motion to receive this report, please? Thank you, Ingrid. Seconded by? Maybe over here. Thanks, Nev. All in favor? That's received. Okay, we have now disposed of the consent agenda. We move on to our discussion items, starting with 4.1, Chief Board Communications Policy, which was hinted at by the CGO during his presentation. Fred, you want to frame this for us?
Sure. In the wake of the convoy escorts, the Zone 2 advisor, Ron's counterpart in Zone 2, who's since moved on to PwC, basically had said to the community that a big lesson learned for the boards is to update their policies regarding events like that, and you did update your policy in June on events like that. Also update the board chief communication policy, and there was one other that escapes me at the moment. But so this is exactly that, and I've built it off of a little bit off Toronto's. Much like the major event policy, they were the most advanced, in part because the author of the Morden report on the Toronto 20 is their executive director, so he's taken a personal interest in all of that. I built it a little, Haltonized it, obviously, and basically separated all the regular board correspondence, which all needs to come through Graham onto the portal, and placed on an agenda of one of these meetings or workshop so the board can deliberate and discuss it. It is illegal for the board to do that over email or any other means other than in a constituted meeting. The emergencies, I've coined the phrase matters of immediate strategic significance. And they're outlined there how we would define what that is. And it can be very much an evolving thing. which is intended to address something like that, as of course, big convoy occupations across Canada were evolving situations. And it's a matter of keeping the board informed formally and engaged formally without individual board members having to find the information on media or social media or by rumor or whatever. And so that the board can adapt its longer-term focus in governance to emerging emergency situations. You did see the first version of this, I think, at the June meeting. May meeting, and this chief and I would put our heads together over the summer to finalize the one that's before you. So try to clarify where possible some things for the service, specifically around SIU was one example that comes to mind. So the suggestions that the chief and his staff had. So this is the proposal, and it would finalize the collection of governance policies.
Thank you, Fred. Questions, Ingrid?
Just one comment, Mr. Chair, to Fred. Fred, when I go back to my May notes, when we reviewed the policy, we did make one additional change, and it's specifically under item number 5.1, major incidents resulting in mass casualties. One of our board members had suggested that we change mass to significant. Any major incidents resulting in significant casualties.
Yes, and I had put that in the first draft to the chief, and it came, and we've been trying to find the word, and maybe I reverted it in the discussions, trying to find the wording that also
I think if I'm clarifying. Yeah, I think if I may, I remember talking about that, and I might have been that board member.
You may have been.
I'm not sure. I think what we're looking for maybe is something between significant and mass, because I don't know what a definition of significant or mass is, quite frankly, right? What is mass? How many makes a mass? And I mean, I think that's the issue. I don't think we're waiting for something the size of what happened in Ottawa. You know, we're looking for something that's of importance, right?
Numerous.
I don't know.
I mean, I think there were a few points in here that Fred and I discussed, and the deputies and I, and we didn't want to get, I mean, one person killed in a car accident is a significant casualty. But
it's not a significant number of people.
No, and it's the same when we talked about the SIU, to notify the board every time the SIU invoked their mandate. It may be a very insignificant injury. They may decide the next day to withdraw or disinvoke. So we went with something that's much more manageable in relation to the SIU in response to a death or a life-threatening injury, as opposed to a broken finger or a broken hand, which we'd be notifying you much more often, and it would be insignificant. So we're certainly comfortable with everything here. I understand what is mass is a question, as well as what is significant.
Anybody want to have a further comment on that?
Well, maybe, I don't know, maybe we just need to define the term that we use, that's all. I mean, that sounds maybe a little bit trite, but
I'll be prepared to consider the word multiple.
or numerous.
Or numerous.
Multiple casualties.
Multiple is.
Multiple actually is two. Yeah.
More than one.
It's
Out of the norm.
What is there, I mean, the term mass casualty is used a lot. The media certainly uses it. Is there some sort of inside baseball kind of expectations of what that means in terms of policing?
Like a comment from Ron there, too.
Ron? Oh, hello.
In the United States, mass shooting is defined as 3 or more. If that helps.
It does help. 3 or more serious casualties. But,
I mean, we could literally go through this and wordsmith every word in the document. I think mass casualties, personally, I don't have a problem with that as a reference myself. I think it's...
I don't either, as long as we kind of talk about it.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
What it is.
Yeah. Everything in the document is going to have a certain amount of requirement to have interpretation by the board, by the chief, by anybody that's reading the document. So that's really good input on United States referring to 3 or more, and I would think that that's a reasonable number.
That is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Anything further?
Yeah, I had one other point, Mr. Chair. When we talk about senior police person, what is it? I can't forget the term, senior police, 553, I think it is. If I can get my iPad open here.
senior officers, inspector, or above.
Okay, is that what it is? Now, what about civilian side? Do we intend this to have any application to civilian side?
It could.
Other than uniform is where my mind was going.
I suppose it should. So a senior police officer or civilian equivalent.
I don't know, because I don't know enough about the structure.
Through the Senior Officers Association collective agreement, that would include managers, directors.
So there are some issues with some of these, and Fred and I talked about some of them, and I see public figures is still in here, which is interesting. We could be involved in a situation, I suppose, with a public figure charged with something, whether that is public information, and because they're charged, it might be public information and a media release. We might also be involved with a public figure where there are no charges, and there'd be some real confidentiality issues. So that's just one flag that I have. I mean, I'm thinking of a regional chair or a mayor who's got some situation going on, and it doesn't hit the level of charges or public information. I don't think we would necessarily be in a position to share that. Right, Ken?
I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, if you look at the definition of a matter of immediate strategic significance, it relates to, elevating risk. I'm not sure whether information regarding a public figure increases the operational or financial risk of the board or the service.
I think the easy part, sworn senior officers is fairly easy for me. Toronto's dealt with this, unfortunately, 3 times this year. Someone charged with impaired driving, someone helping people through a promotional process, and it becomes public. I would automatically let the board know about that situation. So we could add the term director, I suppose, to make it equivalent on the civilian side. The general notion of public figure might be something for the board to consider further.
Well, the caveat in that clause is that it's likely to draw significant media attention. And the reason to be advised is so that board members don't get a microphone shoved in their face saying, what about this? So that's the caveat. So it's already public if the media knows, right? There's a vote to be. Yeah. And it's just a heads up.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's a statistic.
I think that caveat is what makes that clause operative, and in terms of the concerns that the department expressed with respect to things that maybe are not public or not able to be shared. So I mean, if if it's something it's still investigating, it's still quiet, you can't share, it's not going to necessarily draw media attention. I think that the litmus test is this something that City TV is going to stick a microphone in front of one of our faces? And if that's the case, then I think it's important that we be aware of it. So I support it remaining there myself.
I'd just like to make a comment. I mean, based on what Ken said a minute ago, I mean, if the board is the employer, like I was in an organization for a very long time where there was an awful lot of pressure on force starts to be at different times. How many members of parliament are under investigation? And who should know? Who shouldn't know? If the board is in fact the employer, I don't know where that's, like, maybe that line has changed, but I would question that somewhat.
Well, I have no difficulty or concern at all sharing with the board when a member of the service is charged or that you are the employer. This is an outside public figure. I'll use the example of a mayor for no reason, but
But again, those words are likely to draw significant media attention. So the reality is that we're going to know about it one way or the other. It's better to know about it proactively than reactively. You know, I've had phone calls, like as the chair, I've had phone calls from the media on various things, and you know, it's easier and more defensible for me to say I'm aware of it, but I'm not prepared to discuss it. This is something you have to talk to communications about, rather than being broadsided that he did what, you know, and it's I think, or she, I think it's important that you know, again, it's just like defining mass casualties. It's a matter of defining, you know, what particularly your mind, what is a significant event that should be brought to the attention of the board. It's not a micromanagement piece. It's more along the lines of, you know, some clarity around our expectations, but there's still a lot of interpretation necessary. So if somebody gets a speeding ticket, obviously, you know, if a mayor gets a speeding ticket, that's not going to be a significant event. If the mayor gets a speeding ticket and runs somebody over, that's a significant event.
Three or more.
Runs over three or more, sorry. I think that one trumps the previous, but I think there's a certain amount of discretion on the part of the management to make that determination.
And so on the mass casualty part, I'd be comfortable with, we're talking about death and three or more being.
Now, one of them happens to be the mayor.
Keep picking on the mayor here.
Does that make a difference?
So unless it's the mayor, so it's mass casualties unless it's the mayor, in which case we're always notified.
No, I think a lot of this comes down to common sense.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody's trying to nitpick here. Let's just move forward, you know, with something that makes sense.
It's like any statute. I mean, there's a certain degree of interpretation that you have to make when you're reading a statute to determine does this actually apply in this particular case. Chief.
Yeah, so the one thing Fred and I had long discussions about this that I'd like to clarify for the deputies and I is, and Ron knows the difference between Halton and how we do things in other jurisdictions. I tend to, and we all do, to be more transparent and to communicate more. This is really about when we must communicate, as opposed to when we can communicate. So I would not want to see this stop us from other communications that we do with board members. So I'll use my sometimes general information emails to you. I would not take some of those internal bulletins and formally send them to Graham so that he can send them to you, because I think the real value in them is here's just some information. It's not for you to make the board decision about. It's not board business. It's just information. So I just personally would not want to see this stymie the informal communication that we have. And it's on me to make sure I'm not asking you to make a board decision. We do that at board meetings, and we do that through Graham, and that's perfect. But I think there's a lot of little bits of information, if I was a board member, I would want. So that's my point on this.
I think it should be going into the correspondence thing of the portal, because I think there should be a record of all of that stuff. That's me. I also think that it should be up to the board to decide if they want to respond, which means, so, like most of, like updating the board on internal communique, for instance, it isn't going to be an agenda item likely, but the board does, it has an agenda item for all of the correspondence, kind of like a consent agenda thing, and the board can pull any of them out to discuss. And so I think the point is that by formalizing it, the board gets to decide. Not management's not deciding what's before the board, and whether the board discusses it or not. Because if you email it, they can't. The board members can decide if they want to discuss it. So that's my suggestion. Now, if it's important enough that it can't wait until the next board meeting, then it's a matter of immediate strategic significance. Why it can wait? That would be, I would err on the side of if it's useful information to the board, then it should be part of the record.
But I think,
or the board as a whole.
I think like anything else, like either these other items that we talked about, there's always going to be a matter of discretion on the part of the chief or the deputies or the board in terms of, when something is insignificant or informal to be conveyed. But I think when you go back to one of Fred's original comments, that all of this is born out of really a combination of Morden as well as the incident in Ottawa. Board members always have to prepare to answer the question, what did you know, when did you know it? In the case of a hearing or public inquiry or FOI request. So having a formal chain of communications is very important. But again, just like determining when, a public figure stubbing his toe becomes, a significant event, I think it's the same thing in terms of communications. There needs to be formality of the process so that we always have that policy we can refer back to when in doubt. But like every other aspect of our business or any of the other responsibilities we have, there's always a certain amount of discretion that we have to take into account and determine, is this something that has board significance, or am I simply passing on an interesting tidbit that might be helpful, on an individual basis, not necessarily on a strategic basis. So I think it's important to have the policy in place to create those formal channels for communications, and then leave it up to everybody to sort of self-police in terms of what is significant, what requires board action, what requires a decision, what is a potential input to a future decision, and govern ourselves accordingly. That's how I would perceive it. And I think that pretty much is what you basically suggested your concern is. So.
Yeah, I guess my concern is there are a lot of things that I think are interesting to the board, maybe they're not, which would not reach the level for me to bring to a board meeting. For example, the internal bulletin to all of our members, which might mention a person who passed away. I don't want that to be on a public portal somewhere. But if the board would only want to hear about things that the board might need to make a decision about, then we can keep it at that level and make it all formal through Graham or bring it to a board meeting. But I think the board members, as also as employers, would lose some sense of communication and things that go on in the service. So that's just, it's totally up to the board.
I think it's a great example, though, where discretion is applicable. I mean, I think that, that would be something that, I as a board member would want to know about if one of our officers, were to, succumb to some illness or something, and I don't think that requires, in my opinion, again, this is where this discretion comes in, in my opinion, that's not something that you necessarily have to report through the clerk or through the secretary. But I think if it's, more significant, but,
routine.
Yeah. More routine nature stuff, I think that can go through, the secretary so that everybody gets the information at the same time. And we've met requirements of freedom of information and proper transparency and such as well.
Perhaps what we should consider is a board member only area in the portal. Like I enjoy getting the service-wide, communication. For me, that keeps me in touch. I enjoy getting it, and I read it without fail, right? I don't want to cut that off. Maybe, to your point, Fred, maybe we need, a member-only part of the board. I'm not a techie, but...
Oh, we do have one, so it'd be a matter of just training everybody to board-only correspondence, which could be...
Matter of training me.
Posted in at any time.
Yeah. Because anything can be put in there, you get a notice that it's there, notification, and away you go, right?
Yeah, let's just make a point of maybe reacquainting everybody with the various sections of the portal. Said that I can't get no trust on that. It's there. I'm going to plug it right now.
Just back to civilian. I'm not hung up on civilian. I just didn't know what threshold we were talking about. One was senior officer, and I didn't know if there were civilians that meet that threshold. That's all, right? Because I don't have that intimate knowledge of what the threshold is, right? Is it compensation? Is it level? I don't know what it is, right? So
basically, we have the three of them there.
Yeah.
and building.
Yeah.
So we just put their names right in it. If anything happens to Paul, Ken, or Tracy, then you have to let us know.
So is that an amendment?
I think that would be a good amendment. Not Paul, Ken, and Tracy, but...
No. Civilian directors.
Yeah.
Civilian directors.
Yeah. And mass. Now I know what mass means. I'm happy with that.
For your work.
And again, when applying all of these, the policies are obviously important to abide by, but there's always a degree of interpretation and sort of doing a litmus test to determine whether this applies or doesn't apply. I mean, if anybody knows how to do that, police officers do so. Any further on this?
No, I'm happy with it.
Okay, can I get a motion to approve the policy as amended with the addition of the words civilian directors to 5.3? Is that sufficient, Mr. Secretary? Is that sufficient direction?
And mass, we're leaving it, right?
Mass is...
We're leaving mass in,
Yeah.
Any further comments or questions? All in favor? And that's carried.
I was going to say, in the U.S., when it comes to mass shootings, that it's actually 3 or more, not including the shooter. They even make that distinction, because it's happening every day, they make that distinction in the U.S.
But we know you won't make that distinction.
Hopefully we won't have that situation come up at all. 4.2, semi-annual complaint statistical report, public and internal. Does this need any report? Are members of the board satisfied with the report? Are there questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm very pleased with the report. Super report, as they always are. The one area that struck my attention a little bit is workplace harassment complaints. And I'm just curious, I don't find the number alarming, although one valid complaint is one too many, for sure. But the numbers don't seem to be going down, and I don't know whether that's a function of there's an attitude where it's okay to report now, and so maybe we're getting more reporting. But do we really think that behavior is changing, I guess, is what I'm looking for, a sense of that. Are we making progress? The numbers aren't going down. If anything, they're steady or maybe even going up. But are we making progress, I guess, at the end of the day? Or should we be doing something else? That's essentially my question.
Yeah, and certainly the deputies may have some comments as well. I think a part of it is it's okay to come forward with a complaint, and we want people to think that way, and we want people to act on their concerns when they have them. We're doing some very positive things, I should say. Inspector Sue Biggs and our Superintendent Sue Biggs, and now Inspector Anita Laframboise, presented to you on a lot of the work that the Women's Internal Support Network are doing, changing policy, making it more easier for people to come forward. So I actually may ironically expect an increase. I think the complaints can run the gambit from a supervisor who was too harsh to a sexual harassment type of situation. So we need to monitor those, and we're also going external for those sorts of investigations for all the right reasons. We'll come with an expense to it, but it's the only way to do that end of our business. So, Roger, Jeff.
I would agree with that. And I mean, we've talked about this before, that we know the harassment is happening. It's just not being reported on. So I think there's a bunch of things. I think one, to be honest, the hiring of a civilian director does give people belief and faith that there's going to be an objective view as opposed to another police officer, that, that fear of bias that's always been there. The fact that we do most of them through an external independent lawyer, the word's getting out. And to the chief's point, and with Anita sitting behind me, the work that they're doing, and I'm not going to steal their thunder because it's going to come out in the future, but the work they're doing on trying to humanize our sexual harassment policy, and the fact that we've hired an external human rights lawyer to do that, and the ongoing work that's happening with that, I think people are just getting more faith in coming forward. I still think there's things that aren't being reported, obviously, but I think people are getting more faith in the system, and they're seeing outcomes, and they're seeing that there's professionals that are handling. They're seeing actually the confidentiality. I can tell you that, even just the way that HR handles confidential complaints, even though HR reports to me, I don't know the details of the complaints. That's how confidential it is, unless the HR director determines that I need to know everything. And then I will. But it's been beefing up our system, and all the work and effort I think we're putting into it, then I think we will continue to see that number get higher, quite frankly. And then it's what we continue to do with that, humanizing the policies, making them more usable, but then it's also training isn't the right word, but it's the education component of, like, when we start talking about bystander training internally. How do we change our culture and have guys predominantly intervene when they see sexual harassment as opposed to being bystanders? How do we change that culture? So I think for a while you will see that number rise. Tracy, would you agree, disagree?
We get a lot of people reaching out, trying to understand the process, and I know the inspector has as well as Superintendent Biggs. So we've been meeting to discuss a little bit about how we're actually moving forward on them. Some people are concerned. Some of them are historical, and they're feeling that comfort. So I do believe we will see an increase of people coming forward just to be heard. And people are getting that comfort level that they know that here at Halton, it's a safe environment. They know the deputies and the chief and the senior leadership all support it. And I know, Anita, we've been talking about it, and with the superintendent, we're looking at training and bringing it to the forefront to remove that stigma as well, that you need to bring it forward, how to go about doing it. And with the hiring of the lawyer as well, who's amazing, she'll be doing some facilitating and a lot of projects with us. So we think we're going to see some significant changes, but we're also going to see that rise where people want to be heard, they want to let it be known, and then they can be an advocate for the process and for the service as well, bringing it to the forefront. So I think overall it'll be positive. We'll have a bit of challenges, but I think it'll be a positive outcome, and we're seeing some of those benefits already.
And that's a presentation that you will see in October in regards to Tracy. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the report. I have one question regarding, again, Table 9 with respect to the workplace violence and harassment investigation. So you have about four in 2021 and 3 in 2022 that are unsubstantiated. So what I wanted to know is there a team of individuals, or is there an individual who makes the decision? Could you elaborate on the process?
Yeah, on who makes the determination whether it's unsubstantiated? So for when we hire the external counsel, it's them that determines it, independent of us. They do the entire investigation, they do it confidentially. Tracy will get updates only as like it progresses, but they present a report to Tracy at the end, and they decide substantiated, unsubstantiated, they give the reasons why, and then we take it back from there as to how we respond to that report.
Okay, because I think I was concerned that it's already hard for people to actually report. But then when half of them become unsubstantiated, this is a concern. So this is why there's a question around that. So there is an individual outside counsel that determines that.
We hire specifically employment lawyers who specifically focus on this type of work, or labor lawyers who specifically do this type of work. You'll see, and Ken could comment on Tracy, that there is a growing body of people that practice specifically investigative or harassment investigative type of work. And we've been going through a different group of them and utilizing them, and it is them that determines it based on the law, obviously their knowledge, their experience, independent of anything of us. Because obviously they don't owe us one way or another the end result, right? So
thank you for that.
If you'll allow me just to touch on that point. One of the items that I think is important to stipulate is, regardless of the outcome, if it's unsubstantiated, you do meet, and there are measures put in place, regardless of that outcome, to ensure that the employee has that comfort level even coming back. Sometimes the results, as you had mentioned, can be difficult for the employee when it comes back unsubstantiated, but on all the occasions, we will listen to the employee and put measures in place to support them as well, so they have a comfort level coming back regardless of that outcome, to ensure their well-being.
And that's an excellent point that Tracy brings up, something that they're working on through therapy. And I think the comment was that even though it's not substantiated harassment, there's still a workplace conflict there that has to be resolved. And that's an excellent point. That's something that they're talking about. Okay, it's not harassment technically, but you still have a conflict, and how do we resolve that? Because we want everyone to feel safe and comfortable where they are, and we have to resolve that. And that's something that, through this group, something maybe we weren't great at doing before, but is now a focus, and it's one of the positive outcomes that's coming out.
You heard a comment? Yeah, the only thing is, it struck me today, and we've probably been categorizing this as workplace violence and harassment investigations, not to diminish the harassment investigations at all. I'm not aware that we've ever had a workplace violence investigation, so maybe in the future we'll separate those out, because it could lead to questions that aren't actually there. Other organizations have had workplace violence, some of them very high profile, so it's just, the term never struck me before.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question regarding informal resolution. Does that mean it's not documented, or what does that mean?
No, it's just it's part of the policy that there is certain circumstances, an opportunity, if largely depending on how significant or serious the complaint is, there is an opportunity to do it informally. So maybe it's not the full, drawn-out external investigation. There's an opportunity to deal with it, but it's all documented. None of it is just done word of the mouth. Every time anything comes to us, there's documentation for it.
Anything further on this? Would you like to give me a motion to approve this? So moved, seconded by, please. Thank you, Kurt. Any further comments or questions? All in favor? That's received. And again, I have said approval, I apologize, that's receipt. Item 4.3 is the FY Summary Information Privacy Commissioner Annual Report. I don't think this requires framing by management. Do members of the board have any questions or comments on this? Okay, and moved by Kurt. Is there a seconder to that? Thank you, Ingrid. Comments or questions? All in favor? That's received. Thank you. This brings us to operational verbal updates. Chief or Deputy Hill.
Before we move on to operational verbal updates, if I could just make a correction that we'll have to, there's actually an error in one of the consent documents. Under the purchasing activity, for whatever reason, the document that has been submitted to you is last year's. So we'll have to actually get you this year's. There is a different document, so I will, we can either bring it back in September, but that July The December 2021 is last year's document. I'm not sure why you got that.
In which report?
Under purchasing activity report, under the consent agenda, it is 3.3.
So mine actually says January 1 through January 30th, 2022.
Yeah. Made it.
One that I have here does still have the report.
We'll clarify it.
We'll figure it out then. The one that's on our agenda is July to December 2021.
The agenda dates and the attachment dates are not the same.
Correct.
The attachment dates are the current half year.
So, yeah, looks okay to me.
Yeah, it looked okay to me. I would have caught that.
Okay.
Yeah, the report I have is just in the title of the covering report.
We'll review it.
Yeah.
We're good, because this one clearly says January 1, 22 to January 30th, 22, so we're good. It's a receipt only, so it's not like we've approved.
So I just wanted to make sure.
Thank you for drawing it to our attention. But we passed the test, we all read it, so we knew it was wrong. I thought that's what it was. Did you really read this report?
I would never do that.
Well, you know, you're an investigator, so. Operational verbal updates.
There is, I think there is a requirement in the board's policies to discuss the budget at some level at this meeting in August, so I would only say we certainly are in receipt of the 4.7% budget increase guideline from the region of Halton. Every year we do everything we can to come within that. We may have a couple of particular impacts between now and 2023, which might not allow us to do that. There may be some flexibility in how we handle some of those things that some of the items would be in camera because of security issues. But we are certainly in receipt of that budget guideline. We're continuing to work with Paul and Greg, our managers, to work up the budget and then whittle down all of the asks, which would put us probably twice that much if we looked at everything that we could do. That would not include tripling the size of the crisis response teams either, but we could certainly look at that.
Can I just respond to that? Like for Pav and I and the other, politicos around the table that have to deal with this at the regional level, just bear in mind that we're dealing with very significant pressures at the municipal level as well. And I know that our staff are working hard to find ways to creatively use reserves and such as well. So just throw that out there that this might not be the year necessarily to push that windmill too much, and take advantage of those stabilization reserves that we do have available to us. But it'll all come together in the fullness of time.
Through the chair, I'd like to take a moment just to introduce our newest member of our corporate communications team. It's our new coordinator. It's Julie Roll, who's at the back here. She's replacing Jen Hartman, who went on to U of T. The interesting part about this storyline is Julie worked with corporate communications many years ago here and had an opportunity to go work with the Air Canada Pilots Association for a number of years in that same field. And then she came to her senses and came back. So this is her first week, and she'll be obviously very integrated in a number of initiatives and outreach pieces that we're doing and working closely with Kimberly. So I just wanted to introduce you to her.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Welcome, Julie. Julie, what's your surname again?
Walls.
Oh, sorry.
Walls. R-O-L.
Thank you.
And one other thing, just to follow up with the board, we talked about the ability to kind of forecast events that the board could attend versus telling you about them after the fact. So before the pandemic, we created an events calendar for the service where we could all contribute and see. So we've been working with IT to figure out how this works with the board. And what we've landed on is a shared calendar that what we'll do is with significance, so we'll entertain the idea of, okay, for September, these are the 3 events we think that the board might be interested in. If there's interest, what we'll do is we'll invite Graham to that, and then Graham can distribute it to the board members. That's the most efficient. Everyone has the information about where to be, what to wear, all those kinds of things. So moving forward, as of next board meeting, between Anita and myself, we will come forward with a list of things to look forward to potentially, and then you can indicate what you're interested in. Helps with the increasing the profile of the board and your interaction with the community in this space. So.
in, if you won't mind, let her jump into this. So you're trying to put a calendar together as well on the board website, right, Kimberly?
Correct. So this would be also a public-facing calendar. So anything that's happening within the community, this police board would be at. So Chris is actually working on a calendar scraper, I guess is the term, where it will pull from Halton Region, Halton Police, any public populated calendars that make sense to us to have on our website as well. So we're working as well on a calendar, but that will mostly be public events that we will be at attendance at, or that makes sense to be out there. So this sounds a wee bit different in the sense that it's for board members to attend on behalf of the board, but we are working on something as well on the side.
Well, information is great. When you're talking about events, are you also referring to like presentations or things like that that might have a public or a media component to them?
Yes. So you think swearing-in ceremony, March past, I'm a big event, like for a media release where the chief's going to be speaking. It's like, let's get that in your calendars through Graham, and then you're aware of timing. You just don't want individual back and forth, like how am I supposed to be there, who's speaking, and we can't do that in that calendar format, but inviting Graham and then Graham being the conduit is in our view the best way.
Especially coming out of the pandemic, because we have never had a grip on this aspect, I would say. So,
great initiative. Thank you so much for that, Chief.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about some of the events that we have, which I'll talk about in camera, that might not be public. So let me keep that for other reasons. I think we have two other items of new business. One is a report that I brought to the board today. The other one I think will be dealt with under correspondence in relation to a request from the entrust account. So I could deal with the
we'll deal with the walk-on item under new business, and we'll deal with the pro-action cops and kids under receipt of correspondence. We're almost there. Is there anything else on verbal updates? No. Okay, thank you. Members of the board, I draw your attention to our action registry. Fred, any comments on the action registry? Caught him by surprise. See, he's always prepared.
that was quick. Yeah. Usually you forget this item.
I know. I'm reforming.
Everything's scheduled except for the real-time dashboard. I wanted to ask some questions in board only.
Okay.
What the expectation is.
Can I just make a comment, Mr. Chair?
Yes, you may.
When I read the registry, Fred, I looked at this first item and I said, what was that option B? Real-time dashboard. And I think, could we maybe just say that it had to do with the Halton happenings audit?
It flowed from there.
Because by itself, it's a bit ambiguous in terms of what it is.
Okay.
And I just thought if we have, because I went through my notes of June to see what this was. And it would help if we just said Halton happenings audit.
Okay.
Because option B by itself didn't really mean much.
Would you be prepared to give me a motion to approve the action registry as amended then?
Yes.
Thank you. Is there a seconder to that? Thank you, Pav. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, we're at that receipt of public correspondence issue right now. I mean, this isn't technically public correspondence, but it is correspondence. So first of all, members of the board, is there any other correspondence beyond the item that I asked to raise from the registry? Anybody else wants to raise anything? Okay, so I'm bringing the pro-action cops and kids request to the table. Who wants to frame that for us?
I'll start, and then Raj perhaps, but we have a fabulous relationship and program ongoing with Pro-Action Cops and Kids. Through David Millen and others that are involved in that program, which started out of Toronto many years ago, and we've had it here for a few years. They raise money and fund opportunities for police officers, primarily sworn officers, to interact with youth in a variety of different programs, proactive programs, music, cycling, basketball, many different opportunities. And they run annual fundraising. One of the things that they're going to be doing in the next little while is a fundraising golf tournament. Staff Sergeant Dave Tutt who just left training, but now back in our emergency services unit, is our primary contact there, and Raj is the senior officer connected with Pro Action Cops and Kids. They've come forward with a request for a $5,000 sponsorship donation. I looked at that internally, and my thought, frankly, was that was better served and coming from the board and from the board's in-trust account, which is intended for community types of programs and initiatives. Anything in addition to that, Raj?
What's the ask?
So the ask is for a $5,000 contribution from our trust account. And it's, if we want to consider, I would suggest we do, if we were to approve it, we should approve it on the basis of being a contribution and not necessarily, it may be just in the wording of the letter, but in the wording of the letter, it makes it sound like it is sponsoring a foursome. And I'm not comfortable with sponsoring a foursome. It would be, you know, I have, my opinion, great organization. We've supported them in the past, and I would like to support them personally as a board member. That's the only caveat I have to it.
5,000 sounds like a lot to me. Maybe I haven't got a good enough understanding of it, but it's a big number. What exactly would we be doing with 5,000?
So all money is raised during, this is their priority fundraising event. We'll go to buy sports equipment, to rent facilities, to rent vehicles, to get kids to programs. So the majority of that $5,000 is going right to those investment in those programs. So you recently saw we ran My Camp. That costs money, and that we just have to apply, and it comes right from that money, and it supports chapters. And because Halton has a chapter, we have been asked by the Bital family if we would want to be sponsored through a donation at $5,000. And this is a very corporate, so I think what you saw in the attachment was that's the entry-level sponsorship, and then you can move up. The foursome, I think the wording of the letter is, we're donating money, but we're also given an opportunity then to take some people who run camps here and give them the experience of having part of that day and showcasing their work at the golf tournament. It includes a foursome by chance, but the money goes towards the programming.
I think, you know, supporting underprivileged children or something of that nature, I really strongly, I just don't know enough about the organization, Mr. Chair, and I don't know what the levels of support are. Is it 5,000, is that
Entry level.
entry level? So there's nothing below that.
Not that they turn away money, but this is how they're.
This is specific to this event, so it wouldn't preclude the board from choosing a different amount and just donating that outside of this, but this is a planned event, and when you donate, you get your name on a brochure or something to market the fact that we have a chapter here in Halton.
Unfortunately, the communication on this didn't flow properly. This item is, and there's a description of the organization on the event now in the correspondence portal. I apologize that wasn't there before. Graham sent out a little while ago, so you would have armed with a little bit more information on the organization and the event itself, had you had that. We can't defer it because the event's on September 12th, unless we simply just want to make a straight donation to the organization, which I imagine is an option as well. So I'll leave it to the board members how you want to proceed with this. Could somebody remind us what the current balance is of our trust account, just so that we...
130 something.
Yeah.
394.
Thank you.
A little bit more than I was thinking.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I'll move it.
You'll move it? Okay. It's been moved, and you're moving a $5,000 contribution to Pro Action Cops and Kids. Tab, are you seconding?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I know it's new to us, but charity golf events are, quite the norm. I'm participating in one with the Kerr Street Mission, and a lot of almost 90% of the funds actually go to the charity, and the golf course usually offers a discount to the organizers for actually playing on the course that day. So I'm fully supportive of making this contribution, especially with all the meaningful ways that we found to engage with the organization and have used and run several different programs over the years, so I'd be supportive of it as well.
I'll just read this in for those of you who didn't get a chance. There's an interesting little about. I'm not going to read the entire document, but I'll just, for the sake of anybody watching and also members present, Pro-Action Cops and Kids is a charitable organization that brings cops and kids together in a skill building and mentoring program to create trust, respect, and safer communities. Since establishing in 1991, we have distributed $8.8 million in donations to support 2,283 police-led programs, providing 424,000 youth with access to activities they otherwise would not be able to afford. So it's
Cops and kids, I'm there.
I'm going to get you over. Okay, so the motion's been made to make a $5,000 contribution to Pro-Action Cops and Kids from our trust account. Is there any further discussion? All in favor? That's carried. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. That's... One second here. Switching documents. Okay, and can I get a motion to receive all of the public correspondence that has been received and recorded on our portal? Thank you, Pav. Seconded by? Ingrid, thank you very much. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. New business. We have one item in new business, which is a walk-on item Chief brought, and the subject is public recommendation report title here.
I noticed that.
So it's a generic, I'm just
We should have submitted her later.
No way. I refuse to accept it.
Is he here or is she here?
He is not here.
Plus wheel tracks at your back.
Yeah. Perhaps you could frame this. Maybe give us slightly more detail than what's in the title.
We'll look at the recommendation heading being the more substantial component, but I'd refer to this as financial semantics, gymnastics. It's, really the bottom line of this is we've identified the need and the desire to equip our full tactical team with night vision equipment. It's state of the art. A lot of other teams have that already. I'm honestly not sure why we budgeted for it, $100,000 a year over 4 years, but we did. So we are just bringing those 23, 24, 25 capital budget years, and the request is to bring the $400,000 into this year so that we can equip the entire team. That'll be 18 sets of up-to-date, state-of-the-art night vision. We do deal with a lot of obviously situations at night. Some of those can be very rural in nature, not always well-lit urban types of settings, or within dark buildings. So I do think it's a health and safety issue. It's not just a nice to have, but it is the full budget amount is in our capital budget. We're just moving it forward. So appreciate that.
I would move it.
I would second it. I would say that it's a public safety issue, in fact. I think it's very important.
Okay, so moving to second, I'll just comment that typically we get these reports ahead of time and they're circulated in the agenda. This is an emergent situation, clearly a public safety issue, and therefore I think it's appropriate to be dealt with outside of the normal routing of reports. But we do want to emphasize to our friends and the authors of these reports and the templates that
no names reports.
No names reports, these generic reports. I can hear the beeping. We would like to make sure that we get these as close to our submission date as possible before. But thank you for bringing it to our attention. Members of the board, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor? And we just carried the public recommendation report title here.
Thank you.
Any other new business to come before the board today? Seeing none, I will look for a motion to move into closed session. And can I get that motion, please? Thank you, Kurt. Seconded by Nav. Thank you very much. All in favor? We're moving, that is approved. We're going to move into closed session. To members of the public who are watching us on streaming, we want to thank you for your time and attention, and most of all, your interest in the matters of the Halton Police Board and the Halton Police Service. At this time, we're going to be convening in a closed session, which will not be televised. And we look forward to seeing you, or I guess we won't see you, but we look forward to presenting again at our next board meeting, which will be held in September. So thank you for watching. Members of the board, we are going to recess for lunch, correct? So we'll recess for lunch, and it's currently 12:17. I assume lunch is here. So we can reconvene at, let's say, 12:45 in closed session. So thank you, everybody.